Under the myths, under the flood waters, under everything we think we know, a forgotten world is hidden. A world of celestial gods, submerged cities, impossible machines, and knowledge too dangerous to survive. This is not about ancient history. It is a shattered memory, and the pieces keep bleeding. From Turkey to the Pacific, from megaliths to DNA, 30 mysteries shout a single truth. We are not the first, and we will not be the last. Welcome to the most forbidden story ever told. The unsolved mysteries prior to the flood that refused to die. Before diving into the depths of forgotten history, take a second and hit the subscribe button. This channel is your portal to the past that they don't want you to remember. And since you're here, leave a comment. From what part of the world are you watching us? What time is it now? Let's see how far the echoes of this ancient story reach. Atlantis, the sunken civilization. It all starts with a whisper under the waves, a tremor at the bottom of the ocean, the sudden cry of a continent that disappears without leaving a trace, and then silence. No witnesses, no tombs, no survivors, just a myth floating on the tide for 2,400 years. Platon did not intend to unleash 1,000 feverish dreams when he wrote about Atlantis. He was only creating an allegorical, philosophical ideal state, corrupted by power and punished by the gods. But once he described it, people couldn't look away. A powerful empire larger than Libya and Asia combined. A naval superpower with concentric canals, ivory palaces, and walls covered in orichalcum. A paradise of abundance. A utopia turned into a cautionary tale and, suddenly, swallowed by the sea in a single night. That's what Atlantis is. It is too cinematographic not to believe, too specific, too vivid from an architectural point of view, too perfectly tragic. It seems less like a parable than a leaked, classified report of a forgotten epic. And it comes with a date, 9,000 years before Solon, which places it around 11,600 ACC. A moment. That number sounds very familiar to anyone who has spent more than 5 minutes in stranger corners of YouTube or on the dustiest shelves of ancient history. The 11,600 ACC is also when a young dust abruptly ended the last gasp of the Ice Age. The Earth's climate went from icy to temperate in the blink of a geological eye. Sea level rose hundreds of meters. The glaciers disintegrated. The oceans rose, and entire coasts disappeared. So a global flood, a technological civilization, a sudden cataclysm that is not a fanfic of Platon, but a traumatic memory that resonates through time. The idea of Atlantis has always had that disturbing weight, like a message from something that is barely out of our reach. Some scholars argue that Platon may have been recounting an Egyptian account passed down to Solon, encoded in the archives of a temple. Reportedly, the Egyptian priests mocked the Greeks for knowing only one flood, when in reality there were many. They said that civilization was much older and more vulnerable than anyone imagined. And that's where things get weird. Because if Atlantis was real, it wasn't just a city. It was a whole way of life. A snapshot of a human era that we're not supposed to remember. One that worked under a different paradigm. Different technologies, different physics, maybe different rules. Conventional archaeology scoffs. Of course, there is no proof, they say. It is just a story. But let's be brutally honest here. 70% of the Earth's surface is underwater. We have mapped more of Mars than the ocean floor. If a seafaring culture with advanced engineering was annihilated during a sudden flood, we would not find fossils. We would not find anything at all. And nothing is exactly what we find. Except, of course, the trail of architectural crumbs that defy all explanation. Stone cities under the sea, megalithic ruins aligned with forgotten stars, oral stories that coincide across continents, and a relentless question that resonates like a drum. What the hell have we lost here? Let's take, for example, the Bimini Road, discovered in the Bahamas in 1968. A half-kilometer stretch of underwater stones arranged like an ancient road. Geologists argue that this is a natural formation of limestone blocks fractured by erosion. But others observe the sharp angles, the uniformity, the revealing curves of the engineering, and whisper, Atlantis. Then there is the submerged city off Cuba, detected by sonar in 2001. Huge geometric structures hundreds of meters beneath the surface. Roads, pyramids, circular squares, all dated at least 6,000 years ago, maybe more. The Cuban government closed the site. The researchers went silent. The images vanished. A coincidence? Or is this how memories are managed when they contradict the official timeline? Atlantis is not just a story. It is a fracture in the narrative, a crack in the foundations of our historical arrogance. It does not ask us to believe. It challenges us to ask ourselves, if an advanced civilization existed before the flood, how many others did we bury under the waves? And this is where it gets creepy. Atlantis is not unique. Other myths echo the same rise and fall, the same sin and drowning. From the lost continent of Mu in the Pacific to Lemuria in the Indian Ocean, passing through the Kumari Dam off the coast of India, cultures around the world remember submerged lands. They remember that the light faded. They remember that the gods retreated to the stars above. And they all point beyond written history, to a time before time, to the antediluvian world. But Atlantis is the jewel in the crown of this collective amnesia. Not because it is the only myth, but because it is the most detailed, the most provocative, the most heretical to the idea that civilization begins in Mesopotamia and ends in Silicon Valley. Let's entertain ourselves with blasphemy for a moment. What if Atlantis was not just a coincidence? What if it was the last bastion of a declining culture clinging to life before the tide came? What if the Greek account was a version of the survivors' stories, refugees from the depths who transmitted fragments of a forgotten world? Because one day it rained and never stopped. The seas rose, the skies opened, the cities collapsed, the earth swallowed its history, and Atlantis died screaming. Which brings us to the real nightmare. If it happened once, it could happen again. And if we are now beginning to detect the traces of that lost past, magnetic anomalies, underwater ruins, inexplicable knowledge, perhaps we are not just discovering history. Maybe we're triggering a memory now. The story of Atlantis does not end with a moral lesson. It ends with a void there. A void that inevitably leads us to the irrefutable proof of the antediluvian mysterious zone. A place so old, so out of place, and so deeply heretical to our understanding of human development that it is practically radioactive. Buried in southeastern Turkey, under layers of earth and secrecy, lies a temple that should not even exist. The true builders of 𝐦𝐤𝐬 stands as an enigma carved in stone. Enormous, disturbing, silent, not very far from the Syrian border, buried for 10,000 years under a hill that locals called Potbelly Mountain for centuries. A place where nothing was meant to exist. Neither cities, nor writing, nor wheels. Only scattered tribes of hunter-gatherers who lived in mud huts and hunted antelope across the plains. And then the excavation arrived there. 𝐦𝐤𝐬 shattered the entire history of civilization's origin like a hammer breaks glass. Discovered in the 1960s, ignored for decades, and finally excavated in the 1990s, this extensive megalithic complex is now considered the world's oldest temple, dating to around 9600 BC. That is 7,000 years before Stonehenge and 6,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids. Thousands of years before the supposed inventions of agriculture, writing, or religion. Stop and just think about it. They carved 20-ton stone pillars with perfect symmetry before even growing wheat. Each pillar is a monolith up to 6 meters high, arranged in circular enclosures like ritual amphitheaters. The carvings aren't primitive scribbles, but intricate bas-reliefs. Vultures, scorpions, lions, snakes, each animal placed with obsessive care. Each circle was aligned with the celestial bodies. It is not the work of some hungry tribe. It is the work of a vision, and it mocks all the timelines instilled in us. The academic world was taken by surprise. According to the old model, agriculture gave rise to cities, which then gave rise to temples, which led to civilization. But 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐞 reversed that order completely. Here, it seems that the temples came first. Spiritual complexity preceded food security itself. People did not settle down to farm first. They gathered together to build monuments. And then, mystery number one, they deliberately buried it. The entire site was filled in around 800 BC. Perfectly preserved under tons of rubble, as if someone wanted to hide it, not destroy or abandon it, but hide it with almost surgical precision. Why exactly? Who builds a cathedral with a technology that shouldn't exist, uses it for centuries, and then buries it underground? And perhaps most importantly of all, who were these people? The official answer given is hunter-gatherers. But let's be realistic. That's like saying a chimpanzee built the Eiffel Tower because you found a banana at its base. There is no evidence that the pre-agricultural societies of the time had the tools, organization, or math skills to build anything similar to 𝐦𝐨𝐫𝐞. No nearby settlements have been found that could have supported such a workforce. There are no quarries, no workshops, no tools, just a monument rising from prehistory like an otherworldly monolith. Some archaeologists speculate that the place was a pilgrimage center, a sacred place where disparate tribes gathered to worship, feast, and trade. But that only serves to raise more questions. How did nomads, separated by geography and culture, coordinate the construction of a temple complex on this scale? How did they move 20-ton pillars without any wheels? How did they carve reliefs without metal tools at all? How did they align the site astronomically if they had not yet invented writing? It's almost as if someone gave them instructions, or they inherited them. Then arise the alternative theories that 𝐦𝐨𝐫𝐞 is not the beginning of civilization, but the echo of some lost civilization. That its builders were not hunter-gatherers who invented religion, but survivors who preserved fragments of a forgotten era. That the temple was a memory palace, a bunker of myths encoded in stone intended to survive some flood. Some believe it was a map, and others a warning. And then there are the rumors about the Anunnaki beings of Sumerian mythology, who came from above and endowed humanity with knowledge. It is difficult not to squint when looking at 𝐦𝐨𝐫𝐞 and see traces of something else. Not necessarily extraterrestrials, but perhaps not entirely us either. Perhaps it was built by engineers of an Atlantean diaspora. Perhaps the flood came, and a few groups remembered enough to start again. Perhaps they were libraries of the doomed, erected by men who knew the end was near and tried to leave a message. But whatever it was, it should not have survived. And that is most disturbing. 𝐦𝐨𝐾 was not only buried by time. It was intentionally buried, hidden under layers of earth with such meticulousness that someone seemed to be trying to erase it from memory. And they almost succeeded. Even now, only a small part of the site is excavated. What is hidden under the remaining 90% remains unknown. And until more is discovered, we are left with a huge question mark from an era we are not supposed to remember. An era that may have differed from what we have been told. Because 𝐦𝐾 not only suggests a lost chapter of history, it demands it. And if a temple survived the flood, how many others were lost? How many other pre-flood cultures left monuments buried under forests and seas? The world is full of anomalies. Half-buried ziggurats, mounds the size of mountains, and then there is water. Because while 𝐦𝐶 rises above the surface, another mystery lurks below sea. A catastrophe not sculpted in stone, but written in water, and that could explain why the myths of the flood never die. The next mystery is not in the stars. It crashes against them. A tidal wave that rewrites history, not with a whisper, but a roar. If your mind is spinning and we have only scratched the surface, imagine what lies ahead. Make sure you are well prepared by pressing the subscription button. These mysteries run deep, and we are just starting. And hey, leave a comment. For where are you listening? What time is it while you listen? Let's bring a map of the modern world as we unearth the ancient one. The Black Sea flood theory. It does not begin with thunder, but a drip, a whisper of water where there should be none. A slow betrayal of gravity, as the ancient seas slip beyond their limits like ghosts testing doors. Then one day it roars. About 7,600 years ago, approximately 5,600 BC. An event occurred that some geologists consider apocalyptic. It did not begin with fire falling or with earthquakes that split the earth. It began with a sea, the Mediterranean, and a natural dam that had contained it for millennia. The Bosporus Strait, that narrow strip of water between Europe and Asia, did not exist always. Once, the Black Sea was a freshwater lake, landlocked and calm, surrounded by Neolithic communities that cultivated its shores. Then, as the last glaciation receded and the glaciers retreated, the global sea level rose and the Mediterranean swelled. And one day, it rose enough to break the natural land barrier near what is now Istanbul. What followed was not a smooth leak. It was a waterfall, a biblical one. The water poured into the Black Sea basin at a rate 200 times greater than Niagara Falls. Imagine a wall of seawater 1.5 kilometers wide crashing against a lake with the force of a slow tsunami. Second by second, every day for months, perhaps years, the lake became sea. The salt water overwhelmed the fresh water. The coasts vanished under hundreds of meters of water. The coastal towns disappeared. The fields, the houses, and the tombs were swept away by a rising tide that would end up doubling the size of the Black Sea. And for those who lived through it, it was not just a flood. It was the end of the world. The Black Sea deluge hypothesis, proposed by marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman in the late 1990s, posits that this real and measurable geological event may have been the inspiration for some of the oldest and most enduring flood myths in human memory, including perhaps the universal flood, that of Genesis, that of Gilgamesh, and that which is whispered in all cultures with the coast. We're not talking about just a rainy season. It is a planetary trauma, a civilization-level erasure, a reset button made of water. In the Black Sea Basin, there is increasing evidence supporting the theory. Underwater coasts showing sudden submersion, freshwater mollusk fossils buried under saltwater species, ancient settlements now 300 feet below the surface. In 2000, Robert Ballard, who discovered the Titanic, led an expedition that found evidence of human presence along what would have been the prehistoric coast. Fragments of ceramics, tools, vestiges of life frozen in time under the waves. If true, the implications are astonishing. It means that in prehistory, there was a sudden, violent flood, large enough to annihilate cultures, alter landscapes, and resonate on all continents in the form of myths and memories. And this is where the rumors grow louder, because the story of the Great Flood is everywhere. The Mesopotamians spoke of Utnapishtim, warned by the god Ea to build a boat. The Bible speaks of Noah, his ark, and the wrath of Yahweh. The Greeks had Deucalion and Pyrrha. The Hindus spoke of Manu, rescued by a great fish. The Chinese myth includes Nua and the repair of the heavens. The Aztecs, the Mayans, the Nordics, the Australian Aborigines, the Polynesians, all cultures separated by oceans and epics, all remembering the same thing: water, fury, survival, and rebirth. So, if a single geological event like the Black Sea flood could trigger such a lasting mythological explosion, what else did it erase? Who were the people who lived there, cultivating in peace, unaware that the sea was approaching? What knowledge was lost with them? The Neolithic cultures of that region are little known. Their bones have not revealed much. Their walls do not speak, but the temporal coincidence is disturbing. The flood coincides with an explosion of mythological themes in the first civilizations: gods of water, chaos, and the sky. Cataclysmic restarts, forbidden knowledge, survivors carrying the fire to the next world. Some theorists suggest that the survivors of the Black Sea flood became cultural seafarers, that they moved inland, upriver, and into the valleys, carrying with them stories of the submerged cities, the wrath of the gods, and perhaps even the blueprints of lost technology. Is it a coincidence that Mesopotamian civilization began to flourish shortly after the first Egyptian myths spoke of a golden age before the Nile rose? Or is it a legacy? There is something primal in the flood stories, something deeper than a fable, a collective wound transmitted through DNA, a fear older than language itself. The ocean is not a metaphor. It is a predator, and when it rises, nothing survives. That is what the Black Sea flood teaches us. Not only that something happened, but that the memory survives in strange ways. That myth is not always fiction. Sometimes it's just history with names erased. But we are only scratching the surface because the Black Sea flood may explain the flood itself, but it does not explain what was lost. It does not explain the civilizations that seemed to disappear overnight, the structures they left behind, the mythological traces that refuse to fade. It does not explain why, after the flood, new gods walked on the earth, gods who were not all benevolent. And it certainly does not explain why the kings of yesteryear, the first rulers after the flood, were described as beings not entirely human. Which leads us to one of the strangest and most audacious lists in all of ancient history. A list of monarchs that spans tens of thousands of years. Some ruled for centuries, others for millennia. Their names are engraved in clay, and their reigns defy belief. Antediluvian kings possessed superhuman longevity. They ruled before the flood, long before, in an era when the gods still walked among men, and men, if they were men, lived long enough to see forests grow and rivers disappear. Antediluvian kings with superhuman lives. They ruled before the flood, long before, in an era in which the gods still walked among men, and men, if they were men, lived long enough to see forests born and die, rivers carve the stone, and the stars realign their names. They do not come to us from myths, but from records, not from whispers, but from baked clay engraved in the unmistakable writing of the Sumerians, the first known civilization that wrote something, the list of Sumerian kings. It is one of the most amazing documents ever discovered. A cuneiform tablet found in multiple copies from different regions of Mesopotamia, all with a list of the rulers of Sumer that goes back to the beginning of time. It does not begin with cities, wars, or harvests. It begins with a declaration. After the royalty descended from heaven, the royalty was in Eridu, and then it completely goes off the rails. The first kings, those who ruled in the antediluvian era, are said to have reigned for tens of thousands of years. The first ruler, Alium of Eridu, is recorded to have reigned for 28,800 years. His successor, 36,000 years. In total, the kings before the flood reigned for 241,200 years. Let that number linger in your head for a second. That's 241 millennia. More time than all of humanity's recorded history. More time than Homo sapiens has supposedly existed as a distinct species. The kings of Sumer did not live long lives. They lived geological lives. Conventional scholars shrug and say it's all symbolic. The numbers must be lunar years, not solar. Or maybe it's just mythical exaggeration and an ancient way of saying this guy was important. Maybe it's numerology. Maybe it's nonsense. But the numbers are specific, consistent, and only reduced to more familiar durations after the flood. Suddenly, life expectancy shortens. Kings die after decades, not eons. Something changed or someone changed it. The list of kings not only records reigns, but traces a transfer of power from divine kings to mortal kings. From beings who live like titans to rulers who live like men. The flood is the dividing line. The reset button. Before it, we have impossible rulers. After it, we have history. And it's not just Sumer. Other cultures echo this strange idea. In the Hebrew Bible, the antediluvian patriarchs Adam, Seth, Methuselah, and Noah live hundreds of years. Methuselah reaches 969 years. Even after the flood, life expectancy slowly decreases, and Abraham still reaches 175 years. The book of Jubilees, the book of Enoch, and the apocryphal texts speak of a time when human beings were giants, were closer to heaven, and the divine and the earthly were not so clearly separated. Why? What changed? Some theorists suggest that it is not just a metaphor, that the long life of the antediluvian kings reflects a different type of biology, or perhaps a different type of time. That before the flood, the Earth's environment was different. Less radiation, more atmospheric pressure, a stable magnetosphere, a biosphere that allowed longevity on a scale that we cannot understand. Others point to the possibility that they were not human beings in the modern sense, but hybrids, beings created or modified by something else. And this is where the Anunnaki come on the scene. In Sumerian mythology, the Anunnaki were celestial gods who came down from the sky to earth. They ruled the world before the flood, enacted laws, and taught humans agriculture, metallurgy, and architecture. Some say they walked alongside the kings. Others say they were the kings. The Sumerians were not ashamed of their beliefs. Their gods had names, personalities, rivalries. They had seats of power, temples, symbols. And when the first king lists are observed, the divine and the real are often indistinguishable. So, what if these impossibly long reigns are not exaggerations? What if they were receipts? What if the Sumerians were not inventing mythology, but recording a memory? It is easy to mock a king who reigned for 28,800 years until you realize that modern science still cannot explain how ancient peoples moved 100-ton stones, aligned structures with the stars with millimeter precision, or knew about the process of the equinoxes thousands of years before the Greeks. Something doesn't add up. The more you investigate, the stranger it becomes. In some versions of the king lists, even cities prior to Urdu are mentioned and unnamed rulers are named, as if there were records that were lost, even for the Sumerians. And that is the tacit horror of the king lists. It is not that the numbers are too large. It is that the story begins in the middle. The Sumerians write about an era that was already ancient for them. They are chronicling a world they did not build. They inherited the ruins, the temples, the tablets, and perhaps, just perhaps, a fragment of the timeline. And in that fragment, we glimpse a world that is completely foreign to us. An era in which kings were gods or gods were kings. An era in which life lasted for centuries. When wisdom was measured in eons. An era in which the border between heaven and earth had not yet hardened. Then came the flood, a roaring curtain that erased the old order and established a new one. The kings who succeeded them were mortal, ephemeral, forgettable, but always haunted by the names that preceded them. And perhaps that is the crux of it. The king lists do not only record the rulers. It warns us. It draws a line in time and says, something happened here. Something big, something you shouldn't remember. But memory does not die easily, especially when it is engraved in stone, especially when it reappears again and again in tablets, temples, and myths scattered throughout the world, and, sometimes, beyond memory, because the ancient kings may have disappeared long ago, but the legacy of their alleged creators remains. Next, we look beyond the stone thrones, beyond the kings, beyond the flood, towards the sky and towards the gods who came from it, the Anunnaki and the pre-flood engineering. They do not descend with trumpets and halos, but with tools, symbols, star maps, laws, and architecture. They descend with crowns and tablets, not with lightning. They do not come to save, but to instruct the Anunnaki. In the dusty vaults of ancient Sumer, carved on fragile clay tablets long before Egypt raised its first pyramid, the stories begin. The gods did not live in an ethereal sky. They lived in cities. Cities with names, addresses, ziggurats, and irrigation systems, and with family dramas worthy of daytime television. These gods, the Anunnaki, were not abstract metaphors of nature. They were tangible, hierarchical, personal. Some loved humanity, others hated it, others crossed paths with it. According to Sumerian cosmology, the Anunnaki were children of Anu, god of the sky, and 𝐤𝐤, the earth. They were administrators of divine order, the original bureaucrats of cosmos. But they were not omnipotent. They argued, conspired, even rebelled. And above all, they built temples, canals, and civilizations. The stories say that the Anunnaki came to Earth to extract gold, not metaphorical gold, but actual gold. Their home world, Nibiru, was dying. They needed the precious metal to repair their atmosphere. So they came here, to the primitive Earth, and began extraction. But mining is tedious, dirty, and unworthy of the dignity of gods. So they made a decision. They would create a helper. And so, in the story told by the Babylonian Enuma Elish and repeated in the Epic of Atrahasis, humanity was not born by a divine miracle, but by genetic engineering. That is so. The Anunnaki did not just appear and distribute fire. They inserted it into our DNA. They took a native hominid species, some say Neanderthal, others Homo erectus, and improved it. The result, us. This is not just the delirium of conspiracy theorists with tinfoil hats. The ancient texts are surprisingly specific. The god 𝐤𝐤𝐤, patron of wisdom and water, worked with the mother goddess 𝐤𝐚𝐧𝐭 to create humanity using clay and a god's blood. It is a creation myth that does not seem religious. It looks like a laboratory report. And that blood, the texts call it essence of life, what we would call genetic material today. Let's put aside disbelief and follow this path to its terrifying end. If the Anunnaki were real, if they were extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional or simply a separatist civilization, then humanity would not be born from dust. It would not have evolved, but would have been built, designed. A tool, a servant, a slave species manufactured to serve the divine miners of Mesopotamia. And if that is true, then the ancient ruins scattered around the world take on a different meaning. Because the Anunnaki not only created us, but left plans. Imposing ziggurats in Sumer, Cyclopean walls in Peru, huge stone platforms in Baalbek, Lebanon, of which the stone of the pregnant woman weighs more than 1,000 tons. That's 2 Boeing 747s stacked on top of each other, cut and placed with a precision that even modern cranes would have difficulty matching. The conventional explanation: rollers and ropes, slaves and sweat. Apparently, the ancient world was like a gym with better architecture. But here's the crux. In all cultures with a megalithic tradition, the legends say the same thing. We did not build this. In Egypt, it was said that the pyramids were built by the gods in the time of Zep-Tepi, long before the pharaohs. In Bolivia, the Pumapunku site was already ancient for the Incas, who said it was erected in a single night by gods. In India, it is rumored that the temples of Ellora were discovered, not built. Again and again, the builders deny their authorship. The ancestors inherited it. They say that the gods built it and then they left. We return to the Anunnaki. Their cities were many: Eridu, Uruk, Nippur, Lagos, each governed by a different god, a king. Each was a node in a network of divine administration. They were not random settlements. They were cosmically aligned centers, designed with an intelligence that speaks more of orbital mechanics than Bronze Age conjectures. Let's consider Eridu. According to the Sumerian king list, it was the first city, the beginning. The royalty descended there from the sky. Its ruler, 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐿, who reigned for 28,800 years, and the city's patron god, 𝐤𝐤𝐤. It was not just a home. It was a headquarters. Some researchers believe that the ziggurats were not only temples, but power plants, stargates, portals, devices. Its stepped terraces could have resonated with frequencies unknown to us. The gods not only lived there, but operated from there. And perhaps, on rare occasions, they also punished from there. Because the Anunnaki grew tired of humanity, noisy, rebellious, and too numerous. The Atrahasis epic tells us that Enlil, a main god, was disturbed by the growing chaos of humanity. Too much noise, too much procreation. So he planned a selection, a flood, not to purify, but to prune. 𝐤𝐤𝐤, compassionate with his creations, whispered the truth to a man named Atrahasis, told him to build a boat, gather animals, and prepare. Does this sound familiar? This story is more than 1,000 years older than the book of Genesis. And in it, the gods are not divine judges. They are project managers with buyer's remorse. The flood is not a punishment for pest control. An inconvenient restart. After the flood, the gods withdrew. The list of kings records this transition. Life expectancy is reduced. Divine reigns give way to mortal kingdoms. The Anunnaki retire. Humanity inherits the rubble. But the scars remain. From the temples of Mesopotamia, from where the stars were observed, to the impossible masonry of pre-Columbian America, we find traces. We find alignments with Sirius, with Orion, with the Pleiades. We find geometry embedded in the myths. We find technological echoes in the most sacred texts. And in every corner of the world, we find the same story. The gods of the sky came. They taught, ruled, and disappeared. Did the Anunnaki return to Nibiru? Did they ascend? Were they persecuted? Did they hide? Or did they leave us here incomplete, abandoned, dangerous? One more thing. The name Anunnaki means those who came from heaven to earth. But the sky did not mean the clouds. It meant the stars and the earth, not just the ground under our feet. It referred to us. They did not come to our planet. They came to our world, to our genes, to our temples, to our myths. And if they created us, then maybe, just maybe, the project is not finished. Maybe we are still evolving towards something they started. Or maybe we are time bombs, unsupervised experiments. Be that as it may, the world before the flood was their domain, their petri dish, their laboratory. And when the flood came, it erased everything, but not completely. Because if the Anunnaki left anything behind, it was not temples or texts. It was a question that burns in every myth, in every ruin, in every whispered legend of the ancient world. Who built this? And why did they leave it? But the story does not rest only among the stars. Just below the pyramids of Egypt, buried under the sand and time, lies another mystery. One that does not speak of celestial gods, but of a golden age. A first time in which beings of light ruled over men, and the Nile ran through paradise, the Zept of Egypt. In the beginning, they say there was a time unlike any other. A time when the gods walked as kings. When divine knowledge flowed like the Nile. When the world was not yet broken, but complete, ordered, luminous, and vibrating with celestial precision. The ancient Egyptians had a name for it, 𝐦𝐤 the first time. And unlike the later myths of the Greek demigods or the Nordic giants, 𝐦𝐤 was not a fantastic bedtime story. It was considered history, sacred, codified, venerated. The Egyptians built their entire civilization on the idea that 𝐦𝐤 was real, that everything they were came from what had been lost before. The myth describes a golden age in which the gods descended on the Nile Valley led by Adon, the creator. In this primordial era, there was no death, chaos, or decay, only divine order, Mahit, and the infinite potential of uncorrupted knowledge. And then something fractured. The gods fought. A civil war broke out among the divine. Osiris was betrayed by Set. Horus sought revenge. Chaos was born. The golden age crumbled, and the gods retreated, some to heaven, others to the underworld, others perhaps to silence. The pharaohs of Egypt did not only rule their people. They were avatars of this divine lineage, living embers of 𝐦𝐤. Each coronation, each ritual, each inscription in the temples echoed a single and desperate desire to restore the first time, to bring back the gods, to resurrect the world as it was. But this is where things take a sharp turn toward the abyss. Because if 𝐦𝐤 was real, if it was not just a spiritual metaphor, what kind of world was it? And more importantly, what kind of technology did it have? Let's start with the monuments. The Great Pyramid of Giza is not just a tomb. In fact, there is no body, no funerary inscription, no mummified remains. It was never conceived as a tomb. Its internal chambers are precisely aligned with specific stars. Alnitak in the belt of Orion, Sirius Thuban. Its base is leveled with millimeter precision. The sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal points. The structure encodes the number pi, the golden ratio, the speed of light in meters/second. Seriously, look for it. 299,792,458 ms encoded in the coordinates of the pyramid. Coincidence? Perhaps. But if the Great Pyramid was built during 𝐦𝐤, it was not built by slaves dragging stones up ramps with ropes. It was built with knowledge. Knowledge that has been erased, hidden, or deliberately misinterpreted. The Temple of Luxor, for example, reflects the human body with a precise architectural scale of its organs. The Osirian in Abydos contains granite blocks weighing 100 tons, perfectly placed in underground chambers carved into solid rock. The Serapeum of Saqqara is a catacomb of 24 black granite sarcophagi, each weighing up to 80 tons, polished to optical smoothness, housed in narrow corridors with no room to maneuver. How were they transported? How were they carved? The standard answer is very carefully. But the Egyptians themselves never claimed to have built these things themselves. Instead, they always looked back to an era before dynastic Egypt, before Menes, before the Old Empire, even before the unification of the two lands by Narmer. They spoke of gods, demigods, and resplendent beings who came from other places and taught the mysteries of the cosmos. This is where figures like Thoth enter the scene. It was said that Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing with the head of an ibis, had existed in 𝐦𝐤𝐵 as a scribe to the gods. He brought language, astronomy, alchemy, and geometry to man. He did not invent these things. He delivered them. In some versions, Thoth is more than just a god. He is a cosmic intelligence, a transdimensional mind, a being who remembered what we had forgotten. The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, a much later esoteric text, claim that he hid the knowledge in secret chambers deep within the Sphinx and the pyramids, waiting for the moment when humanity was ready to remember. Even if it's pseudo-history, it reflects something powerful. The Egyptians believed that their greatest wisdom came from before the flood, not after. Herodotus, who visited Egypt in the 5th century BC, was informed by temple priests that their history went back 11,340 years. They showed him lists of kings, scrolls, and relics. He was stunned. In Greece, the oldest myths dated from about 2000 BC. But in Egypt, they remembered a time before time. Here is the most surprising thing. The date they gave him, around 11,340 BC, coincides almost perfectly with the most recent younger dust impact hypothesis. That mysterious period in which the Earth's climate changed abruptly. When the last glaciation ended, when sea levels rose, when something happened. The same moment when Platon said that Atlantis was destroyed. The same moment when the flood myths say that everything drowned. The same moment when, according to the Egyptians, the gods walked the earth. So, what if 𝐦𝐤𝐵 was not a myth? What if it was the surviving memory of a real advanced civilization that was wiped out by a global catastrophe? There is more. The inventory stela, a little-known inscription found near the Sphinx, mentions that Khufu, traditionally considered the builder of the Great Pyramid, actually repaired the Sphinx, which was already ancient in his time, and that it was built by the gods in the first time. Egyptologists dismiss it as a forgery. But they have to, because if the Sphinx predates Khufu, that would undermine the entire chronology of Egyptian civilization. And there is the water erosion. The geologist Robert Schoch surprised the academic world when he demonstrated that the Sphinx shows signs of erosion from heavy rains more consistent with a subtropical climate thousands of years before dynastic Egypt. The last time it rained so much in Giza was around 10,000 BC. You again. 𝐦𝐤𝐵. The implications feel chilling. What if the Sphinx is not 4,500 years old, but 12,000? What if the pyramids are not monuments to the dead, but surviving artifacts? Stargates, energy collectors, machines abandoned by a civilization that knew the end neared. What if the gods of 𝐸𝑝, Osiris, Isis, and Setwarrant were metaphors? What if they were beings, not divine in the religious sense, but powerful, technological, ancient, the last vestiges of builders? Perhaps they did not only govern men. Perhaps they created them. Perhaps 𝐸𝐵 was the Anunnaki by another name. And when the flood came, when the youngest and driest comet hit, or the polar caps melted, or the earth shifted, they left or were lost. And the survivors who crawled out of mud only remembered fragments. They drew stars. They built temples. They told stories. Stories that became myths. Myths that became religion. Religion that became archaeology. And at some point along the way, we forgot that everything was one thing. We forgot the first time. But Egypt never did. Even when empires fell, when Rome conquered, when the sand swallowed cities, the temples of the Nile whispered a truth. We come from something bigger, and the relics are still here, waiting. Which brings us to the next unsolved mystery that challenges everything we know about the timeline, technology, and myth of progress. A structure so vast, precise, and impossible that even the modern world bows before it. A monument that should not exist unless someone somewhere remembered 𝐸𝐵 and rebuilt it. The pyramids and the knowledge from before the flood. There they stand, colossal, silent, immovable. They're not just stacked stones, but something else, something primal. The Great Pyramids of Giza not only dominate the desert, but control it. For more than 4,000 years, they have bewitched all the souls who have dared to question their origin with their geometry. Tourists gape. Scholars argue. Conspirators point to stars. And yet the pyramids do not speak. They don't need to, because their very existence is an enigma, one that we have been trying to solve for centuries. But what if we're asking the wrong question? Instead of asking ourselves how they were built, perhaps we should ask ourselves when, and better yet, who. Let's start with the official version. According to mainstream Egyptology, the Great Pyramid was built around 2560 BCC for the pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops. The second pyramid was for his son Khafre. The third for Menkaure. These structures were tombs, glorified burial mounds, erected by an expanding state that flaunted its power and engineering prowess. The theory goes as follows. Tens of thousands of workers, perhaps slaves, perhaps not, using copper tools, sleds, and ramps, carved and transported 23 million blocks of limestone and granite, weighing over 80 tons, to build the Great Pyramid in just over 20 years. Take a pause. Now try to imagine it. That means placing a block every 2.5 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 2 decades. Without errors, without major deviations, just a perfectly level base, an almost perfect square footprint, and a ratio between height and perimeter that encodes the mathematical constant pi. And then think about it. Despite the technological limitations of the time, not a single plan or blueprint has been found. There are no papyrus rolls that explain the logistics. There are no sketches on how to maneuver stones the size of train cars through the desert. Only inscriptions on the tombs that celebrate the greatness of the pharaoh. How convenient. Then we get to the construction itself. The sides of the Great Pyramid are aligned to true north with an accuracy of 360 degrees. That is better than the Royal Observatory of Greenwich. Its base is almost perfectly level, with less than an inch of difference across 13 acres. Its internal axes point toward specific stars, the Orion Belt, Sirius, and Thuban, the polar star of 10,000 AC. Why would a Bronze Age king care about a celestial alignment more precise than any achieved until the invention of GPS? Unless the pyramid was not just a tomb. Unless it was a clock, a map, a machine. Some theorists, discarded by the Academy, but obsessed by those who look beyond, propose that the Great Pyramid is much older than Khufu, that he did not build it, that he simply claimed it. The inventory that Stella found near the Giza Plateau mentions that Khufu repaired the Sphinx, not that he built it. It also states that the pyramid already existed. Egyptologists call it an anachronistic forgery, but the erosion patterns on the Sphinx suggest otherwise. They tell a story of heavy rains, not desert wind. Rains that last occurred more than 10,000 years ago. If the Sphinx is older than dynastic Egypt, why not the pyramids? Graham Hancock, Robert Val, John Anthony Westall, the so-called pseudo-archaeologists. According to the majority opinion, they have pointed out the astronomical alignment of the Giza complex and its correlation with the constellation Orion, not only in form, but also in time. Around 10,500 A.C., the Orion Belt aligned perfectly with the arrangement of the pyramids. And what is so special about 10,500 AC? It is the end of the Younger Dryas, the end of the last glaciation, the beginning of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent, the emergence of strange anomalies such as 𝐦𝐨𝐫𝐞, the first known Templar complexes, and, according to Plaudia, when Atlantis sank under the sea. This cannot be a coincidence. What if the Great Pyramid was not built after the start of civilization, but was a relic of the civilization that started it? What if it was not a tomb, but a transmitter? Inside the pyramid, there are no hieroglyphs, no works of art, no decorative motifs common in pharaonic tombs, only precisely carved corridors, chambers with mysterious niches and acoustic properties that defied logic. The so-called King's Chamber resonates at 440 hertz, the pitch of a concert. The entire structure is connected to the Earth's magnetic field. Nikola Tesla once claimed to have discovered a frequency emitted by the planet itself, a kind of earth hum. He believed that the pyramids were designed to harness it. Tesla even built his Wardenclyffe Tower based on similar dimensions. He called the pyramids power plants. And he was not the only one. Christopher Dunn, a mechanical engineer, studied the Great Pyramid and concluded that it could have been a huge power generator. Its internal structure resembles that of a sea of hydrogen. The quartz-rich granite blocks could have vibrated at high frequencies. The underground chamber could have functioned as a resonance chamber. The internal air ducts, misnamed, could have served as energy conduits. Perhaps this is science fiction. But explain this, then. The Great Pyramid sits in the geographic center of a landmass. It encodes the dimensions of the Earth, the precession of the equinoxes, the golden ratio, and the speed of light in its proportions. 144,000 stones were used in its construction, a curiously biblical number indeed. Its cornerstone, which is missing today, could have been metallic, perhaps conductive. It aligns with Orion, the constellation of Osiris, god of rebirth and the afterlife. And again, there are no bodies, no names, no mummies, only stone. Cold, precise, perfect. A mystery frozen in limestone. Now, let's move the image back. All over the world, pyramids arise like echoes. In China, in Mesoamerica, Indonesia, and Bosnia. Built in different styles, in different eras, and by different cultures, but always pointing upwards, always pointing to something. The stars, the gods, our origin. Why did everyone construct pyramids? Because the pyramid was not only a tomb. It was a symbol, a machine, a beacon. And if Giza was the master key, the others were attempts at replication, remembrance, or resurrection. This brings us back to the idea of a pre-flood world. What if the Great Pyramid wasn't a project of Bronze Age engineers, but a vestige of the last cycle, a surviving artifact from Zepi's end? A structure designed not only to survive the flood, but also to warn of it. The ancient Egyptian priest Manetho once wrote about a dynasty of gods who ruled for millennia before the first pharaoh. He called their leader Thoth. He said that they first arrived and that, when their era ended, they left behind their temples and sacred geometry, waiting for humanity to awaken again. Perhaps the pyramid isn't the story of how great the ancients were. Perhaps it's the story of what they lost, of how far we've fallen. Because standing at the base of that monolith with your head raised towards the sky, with your gaze following the slope toward the sky bleached by the sun, you don't feel triumph. You feel small, like a child looking at his parents' tools, knowing you cannot even guess their function. And maybe that's just the point. The Great Pyramid doesn't tell us what happened. It asks us what we've forgotten. But if the pyramid was built to survive the flood, what else was? What other monuments exist? What other messages remain? What other machines lie buried under centuries of sediment and sea? What if not all of them are on firm ground? Because the next mystery takes us underwater, to a tower of tongues, to a stairway to heaven, to a structure said to have touched the sky and struck down by an angry god. The Tower of Babel, then. 7 mysteries solved, and the rabbit holes get darker and darker. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, because what comes next? It gets stranger, deeper, and much harder to explain. And while you're here, tell us in the comments what part of the world you're watching us from and what time it is right now. Let's see who else is wandering through the ancient darkness with us now. The Tower of Babel, a pre-flood relic. The story is brief, almost suspiciously so. It barely occupies a chapter of Genesis, a high point in a much longer saga. But what it lacks in length it makes up for with disturbing grandiosity. A tower so tall that it could reach the heavens, so ambitious that it threatened the gods themselves. And a punishment so absolute, so elegant, that it fractured language itself. The Tower of Babel. We all know the summary. Humanity, once united by a single language, gathered in the land of Shinar, ancient Mesopotamia, and built a city with a tower reaching to the sky. The purpose was not worship or defense, but legacy. Let us make a name for ourselves, they said, so that we are not scattered across the face of the earth. In response, God descended, not to destroy the tower directly, but to confuse their speech, fragment understanding, and provoke division. So they stopped building, scattered, and the tower was left unfinished. That is the story, but as always, the story is just smoke. We want the fire. Let's investigate. First of all, there is the structure itself, a tower that reached the heavens, built by a united human race. That is already strange. Most ancient peoples built to serve the divine, not challenge it. This was a monument not to gods, but humanity. A challenge, a throne of defiance. But if it wasn't about ego, if it wasn't a cosmic tantrum over early urban planning, what was it? Some theorists suggest that the Tower of Babel was not just a tower, but a machine. A ziggurat, yes, but more than that, a communication or even a transport device. A stargate, not in a metaphorical sense, but a literal technology designed to cross the border between dimensions, to open a portal from Earth to the heavens. Does it sound far-fetched? Not if we take into account what the ancients understood as heaven. The word heaven in the original Hebrew is shemayim, which does not mean only life after death or clouds. It means the sky, the stars, the cosmic firmament, the realm beyond Earth. And if Babel was a technological relic from a time before the flood, perhaps the confusion was not punishment. It was protection, a security measure, a security system, a global reset. In Mesopotamian tradition, the Tower of Babel is often associated with 𝐜𝐤𝐬𝐤, a huge ziggurat dedicated to the god Marduk in Babylon. But, as grandiose as it was, it pales in comparison to the scale described in Genesis. A tower to reach the sky is not architecture. It is a declaration of cosmic intentions. And this is where it gets darker. The name Babel comes from the Hebrew word Babel, which means to confuse. But in Akkadian, the language of ancient Babylon, it means gate of God. 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐿, a portal, a threshold, not just a structure, but a crossing point between planes. So, let's put this in order. A united humanity, a device to reach the stars, a rupture between dimensions, a divine intervention that altered communication from the root. The Tower of Babel begins to look less like a fable and more like an account of catastrophic failure, or perhaps a cover-up. Now ask yourself, why did the gods care? Why would an all-powerful deity fear a tower? Why didn't he destroy it like Sodom or flood it like Noah's world? Because the danger was not the height, but the unity. It was about a civilization without borders. A single language, a shared vision, technological capacity, an understanding so deep and synchronized that they could reach beyond the atmosphere with mud bricks. This is the part that should give you chills. What if Babel was not the beginning of civilization's ambition, but the last gasp of a pre-flood culture trying to restart? What if the flood hadn't erased everything? What if some survivors had managed to escape? And what if Babel was his last attempt to reconnect with what guided him the first time? That would explain the exaggerated reaction. Because in myth after myth, we hear the same warning. Humanity tried to steal fire from the gods. Prometheus, 𝐤𝐨𝐬𝐿, Lucifer, the serpent in Eden. Again and again, the story is the same. Humans are given knowledge. Knowledge was stolen from them. Forbidden knowledge. And each time they were punished. Babel may have been the last known rebellion. A resurgence of antediluvian memory, a technological echo, a desperate attempt to rebuild what was lost, and an equally desperate attempt by those above to stop it. Let's delve deeper. There are no ruins of the tower, nor plans that have survived. 𝐜𝐤𝐤𝐬 was destroyed and rebuilt several times. But if the original Babel predates the flood, then it would not be standing anyway. It would be buried under the mud, under the silt, under the weight of 10,000 years of denial. Or even worse, rescued and dismantled. Because what if pieces of Babel were recovered? What if its core technology, whatever it was, had not disappeared, but was hidden in secret chambers, in elite lineages, in the rituals of ancient priesthoods? Remember, the myths of the flood do not end with survival. They end with knowledge sealed, hidden in temples, buried under pyramids, preserved on tablets for a time when man could understand it again. And Babel fits perfectly into this pattern. A great unfinished work, a switched-off machine, a warning encoded in the very nature of language. Because here's the real twist. The division of languages was not only a curse, it was a lock, a security device designed to prevent us from syncing again, from unlocking the frequency, from speaking the original code, the sacred language. In the Kabbalah, there's the concept of Adam Kadmon, the original, perfect, unified man capable of communicating with the divine. Babel may have been humanity's attempt to remember that state, to return to it through language, mathematics, vibration, architecture. And someone unplugged the plug. But the echoes remain in the sacred geometries, in the numerical patterns embedded in ancient texts, in the structures that reflect the heavens, in the whispers that say that all languages come from one. What was that language? Was it sound, light, frequency? We do not know. But the fact that we continue to search, chase, dream of Babel suggests that somewhere in our DNA we remember it. Because the truth is that the Tower of Babel was not destroyed. It was paused. We keep building it. Every time we launch a satellite, every time we digitize a language, every time we build networks to connect all minds in a single space, we are building it again. And maybe someday the locks will fail, speech will unify, the code will return, and the tower will rise. This time not with bricks, but with bits. But before we get stuck staring, we must remember how that story ended the last time. Because the next mystery does not whisper unity. It roars for survival, for an ark, for a mountain, for a ship that weathered the storm while the world crumbled. And it raises a question that no one wants to answer. What if the flood really happened? What if there is still something left? Something parked? The debate about Noah's Ark and the mountain. The world ends in water. Not with the violence of war or with the slow erosion of time, but with a wave. A wall of chaos that floods cities, silences voices, and erases the slate. Thus begins the story of Noah. But it does not end there. Because although the myth of the flood is universal, the focus is not on destruction. It is about survival. In a man, family, ark, and mountain. That is where things become complicated. Ask any school-age child, where did Noah's Ark land? He will probably answer, on Mount Ararat. It is the most common answer. The location certified by modern Sunday school. But the truth is much murkier. Ararat was not always Ararat. The Bible never mentions it by name. It only refers to the mountains of Ararat, in the plural, a region, not a peak. And even then, the original Hebrew word is 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐿, an ancient kingdom encompassing parts of present-day Turkey, Armenia, and Iran. So what mountain was it? What summit bore the weight of humanity's second chance? And more importantly, what, if anything, is still up there? Let's start with the traditional place. Mount Ararat, in eastern Turkey, is a huge stratovolcano that rises more than 4,900 meters into the sky. It is impressive, symmetrical, and perpetually snowy. It is the kind of mountain that seems to hold a divine secret, and for centuries, people have claimed it does. The first documented suggestion that Ararat was the landing site comes from the 4th century D.C., and since then, it has become the default setting, a place of pilgrimage for the devout, a target for explorers, and the focal point of dozens of strange expeditions. One of the most famous took place in 1949, when photographs taken by the United States Air Force during a reconnaissance mission supposedly revealed a large boat-shaped object buried in ice near the summit. These images sparked great interest, leading to multiple expeditions in the 1950s and later. In 1955, a Frenchman named Fernand Navarre claimed to have recovered a wooden beam from the depths of a crevasse on Ararat. He subjected it to carbon dating. The result was that it was about 5,000 years old. Other, more credible adventurers reported strange formations, fossilized wood, and unnatural geometric structures under the snow. And yet, nothing conclusive. All the photos are blurry. All samples are subject to controversy. All expeditions are blocked by the Turkish government or mysteriously disappear into logistical darkness. Skeptics say it's all nonsense, that the mountains simply attract attention because it's tall, remote, and steeped in tradition. But let's take a step back, forget Ararat for a moment, because there's another older, quieter, and much more likely mountain that may hold the truth. Mount 𝐥𝐢𝐤, located near the border between Turkey and Iraq, is explicitly mentioned in the Quran as the place where the ark rested. In Surah Hud, verse 44, it reads, "And it was said, O earth, swallow your water, and O sky, withhold your rain. And the water subsided, and the matter was settled, and the ship rested on 𝐥𝐤𝐤." This is not poetic ambiguity, but GPS. Moreover, early Christian and Jewish traditions also mention 𝐥𝐤𝐤 before Ararat grabbed attention. Syriac texts from the 2nd century placed the ark there. The same is true of Armenian chronicles. In fact, the association with Ararat may have been a later theological reorientation that better fit certain geopolitical agendas. So what is on Mount 𝐥𝐤𝐤? Not much, at least openly. It is not that anyone is allowed to investigate. The region is politically unstable, plagued by border conflicts and restricted access. It is not a place for archaeology, but local legends abound. Shepherds tell stories of petrified wood, of strange ruins, of a boat-shaped depression filled with vegetation unlike anything else on the mountain. And then there is the Durupınar site, discovered in 1959 by Turkish Army Captain İlhan Durupınar. This boat-shaped formation is located about 32 kilometers south of Ararat. It measures approximately 157 meters long, almost the exact length that the Bible gives for the ark in cubits. From air, it looks disturbing, a perfect helmet fossilized in stone. Ron Wyatt, an amateur archaeologist and polarizing figure, spent years investigating the site. He claimed to have found metal fittings, petrified wood, even iron rivets in the rock. Ground-penetrating radar revealed internal cavities shaped like compartments. Geologists, of course, dismissed it. It's just a natural formation, they say. Of course they did, because admitting otherwise would fracture everything we think we know. Now, let's ask the real question. Why does the ark's location matter? Because if the ark were real, if it was a physical vessel built for surviving a global cataclysm, then we would not be talking about just a myth. We're talking about technology. A 150-meter G ship built by a Bronze Age man, capable of withstanding history's greatest storm. That's not just biblical science fiction about engineering. The ark, as described, was not a ship. It had no sails or rudder. It was a barge, a sealed rectangular box built to float, not sail, designed to float, preserve, resist. Could such a vessel have been built 5,000 years ago? Traditional archaeology scoffs at the idea. It would have been difficult to obtain wood of that size. Carpentry techniques were primitive. Waterproofing was rudimentary. And yet the Bible says it happened. The Quran says it happened. The Sumerian flood myth, older than both, says it happened. The Epic of Gilgamesh includes an ark with precise measurements, sealed with pitch and full of animals. Why do all these ancient cultures remember the same thing? Because memory is a stubborn thing. And perhaps the flood was more than myth. We now know that sea level rose dramatically around 10,000 BC. We know that huge ice sheets collapsed, flooding the Black Sea and swallowing entire coastlines. We know that geological records show massive tsunamis in all ocean basins. We know that the Earth has deep, violent, and ancient scars. And maybe, just maybe, someone saw it coming. Noah, Utnapishtim, Zeusudra, Manu, all names for the same archetype. The chosen survivor, the one who built the box, the one who rode the wave, the one who lived to tell the story. So maybe the ark is real. Maybe it's fossilized in the rock. Maybe it's still up there, buried in ice, waiting for the world to be ready. And maybe that's why governments block expeditions, why photographs disappear, why would samples vanish? Because the truth would rewrite everything. And the ark does not only represent survival. It represents continuity, the thread that unites the pre-flood world with ours. The DNA of civilization sealed in a wooden sarcophagus, waiting for the waters to recede. It is irrefutable proof, not because it proves the Bible is true, but because it proves that someone, somewhere, knew the flood was coming. And he had time to prepare, which means he had knowledge, technology, awareness, and understanding of global systems, celestial cycles, and cataclysmic patterns. He not only witnessed the end, but escaped it. And that knowledge, the forbidden one that allows you to defy extinction, is always what disappears after the flood, after the disappearance of Lemuria. If Atlantis is the noisy, sporadic myth of Western esotericism, with its bright needles, its cataclysmic fall, and the just punishment of the arrogant 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐤, Lemuria is its quieter, stranger cousin. Less Plato, more whispers, less monuments, more fog, but you have to dig deep enough. And Lemuria is not just a reflection of Atlantis. It challenges it, because while Atlantis was supposedly swallowed by the Atlantic, Lemuria was shattered by the very bones of Earth. And what makes it particularly disturbing is that the cartographers, mystics, and even scientists who first spoke of Lemuria were not simply speculating. They were following crumbs, evolutionary dead ends, fossil records, and geological scars. Let's begin with a riddle. In the 19th century, zoologists studying the distribution of the large-eyed primates called lemurs, native to Madagascar, noticed something odd. Fossils of creatures similar to extinct lemurs kept appearing not only in Madagascar, but also in India and even Southeast Asia. And yet, it was impossible for those species to have naturally crossed the vast shark-infested Indian Ocean. The solution? Perhaps there was once a land bridge, a lost continent that stretched across the Indian Ocean and connected Madagascar, India, and parts of East Africa, a platform for flora and fauna to migrate before being engulfed by rising sea levels or tectonic movements. The British zoologist Philip Slater gave it a name in 1864. Lemuria, the Thunder Sounds. At first, Lemuria was treated as a legitimate scientific hypothesis. This was before plate tectonics was fully accepted, before continental drift had been demonstrated. The idea that an entire continental landmass could disappear was not merely science fiction. It was a place for the unsolved mysteries of biology and geology. But then the mystics got involved. Helena Blavatsky, the controversial founder of Theosophy, took the idea of Lemuria and launched straight into the cosmos with it. In her writings, in particular the Secret Doctrines, claimed that Lemuria was not just a continent. It was the cradle, the home of a third root race. Pre-human, pre-physical, towering beings of ethereal energy, androgynous, telepathic, and psychic. Their fall came from mixing with lower life forms. A story that is eerily similar to that of the Watchers of the Book of Enoch or the Nephilim from Genesis. Again and again we see these meditative or advanced beings intersecting with early humans and triggering cosmic disasters. According to Theosophical doctrine, the Lemurians were eventually replaced by the Atlanteans, the fourth root race. Each cycle more material, more decadent, more like us, and each destroyed in turn. But let's set the esoteric aside for a moment. Let's reduce it to bones and rocks. Is there any real evidence for the existence of Lemuria? Well, at least not in the sense of a sunken continent the size of India. But what we do have is something stranger. Let's talk about submerged ruins. Off the southern coast of India, near the modern city of Pumulhar, lie the remains of an ancient city that are now hundreds of meters underwater. Indian legends speak of a place called Kumari Kandaman, an antediluvian civilization that once stretched from Madagascar to Australia. Tamil epics describe sprawling cities, cosmic knowledge, and an advanced society that was wiped out by a great flood. Pumpar was a real place, an ancient port city, and what archaeologists found on the seabed. There are no vague alignments of stones. They found an artificial platform, brick structures, ceramic fragments, objects dating back at least 6,000 years, possibly much older. But most strikingly, local traditions said that the sea would reclaim the city long before it actually did. The oral memory of its destruction predated science. That's the kind of thing that keeps researchers awake. Then there are the mysterious temples of Mahabalipuram. Hindu legend speaks of 7 ancient temples built on the Indian coast. Today, only one remains, the Temple of the Coast. But during the Indian Ocean tsunami, the receding water revealed the outlines of submerged structures beneath the waves, columns, stairs, and reliefs. The ocean briefly unveiled a city that shouldn't be there and swallowed it up again just as quickly. In this sense, Lemuria may not have been a single continent, but a civilizational complex extending across what is now the sea bottom. An interconnected archipelago of knowledge destroyed by the rise in sea level and the movement of tectonic plates. This would explain the strange cultural coincidences between Tamil Nadu, Madagascar, and Southeast Asia. Shared motifs, shared symbols, shared gods. If you look deeper, you find traces in Madagascar. Megalithic tombs and sacred stones without any clear origin. In the Maldives, submerged coral structures that could be remains of ancient temples. In Southeast Asia, granite formations that, according to geologists, once belonged to a much larger continent, now mostly submerged. And beneath it all, silence. Because Lemuria, if it existed, did not leave pyramids. It did not sculpt obelisks or engrave edicts in stone. It whispered instead of shouting. And that is why it haunts us, because it is the missing piece that does not want to be found. The culture that collapsed, not with an explosion, but a soft murmur. It may never have had a Plato who spoke for it. No soul to transmit its legacy. Only torrential waters and fossils. But this is where things get uncomfortably relevant. Modern geologists now confirm the existence of a submerged continental fragment in the Indian Ocean called 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐿. Found under the island of Mauritius, this continental mass once connected India and Madagascar. It coincides almost exactly with the theoretical location of Lemuria. Mauritius did not sink millions of years ago, but about 10,000 years ago, right at the end of the last glaciation, the same moment when Atlantis supposedly sank. When 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐞 was buried, when the Sphinx got wet, when the sea level rose hundreds of meters around the world, again and again, the same number appears in the data. 10,000 AC, the end of a planetary cataclysm. And if Lemuria was part of that, if it was one of the cultures erased by the flood, then perhaps the beings that Blavatsky spoke of, the luminous Lemurians, the ancient psychics, were not fantasy. They were memory. And perhaps in those buried temples and submerged cities, we will find evidence that Lemuria was not a dream, but a forgotten chapter in human history. One written not with ink or clay, but in silence. Because Lemuria, like so many other mysteries on this list, does not give us answers. It gives us absence. And absence, when repeated on every continent, becomes a kind of proof, not of what there was, but of what is now missing. But sometimes you don't have to dive into the sea to find a lost world. Sometimes it is enough to look at a map drawn centuries before we knew what Antarctica was like. A map showing ice-free coasts. A map that should not exist. Ancient, advanced cartography. Map of the Piri Reis. There is a difference between a mistake and a mystery. Mistakes can be corrected. A mystery, when it refuses to die, begins to change the landscape around it. And few cartographic artifacts are more enigmatic, more stubborn, or more quietly revolutionary than the map of Piri Reis. It is not just a piece of ancient parchment. It is a hand grenade thrown into the timeline of human history, drawn in 1513 by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis. The map was discovered in 1929 in a dusty pile of documents at Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. What they found was a fragment that corresponded to approximately 1/3 of a complete map of the world. But what remained was enough to cause shock in both historical and scientific communities. Why? Because the map showed something it should not show. A mass of land at the bottom of the world. A mass showing a surprising resemblance to Antarctica's north coast. Not the icy, rugged coast we know today, but a smooth, ice-free outline, as if someone traced the land under the ice sheet. Here's a problem. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, over 300 years after the Piri Reis map was drawn. And we didn't know what the continent under the ice was like until seismic and radar studies during the International Geophysical Year of 1957. However, there it was, on a 16th century map copied, according to its creator, from 20 letters in Mapundi, some of them drawn in the time of Alexander the Great. How is this possible? How did a Renaissance Ottoman admiral obtain a letter that so accurately represents Antarctica's subglacial contours? That is the mystery, and the more you investigate, the stranger it gets. Let's discuss the details. The Piri-Reis map accurately places South America's eastern coast with the correct longitudinal alignment. That's impressive for 1513, when accurately measuring longitude at sea was almost impossible. But the southern part, what Piri called Antarctica, aligns almost perfectly with the coast of Queen Maud Land as it exists under the ice. In 1960, the United States Air Force sent Captain Arlington Mallory to analyze the map. His conclusion was that the original maps used to create the Piri-Reis map must have been based on a perspective from a very high altitude. He wasn't the only one to reach that conclusion. Charles Hapgood, a university professor and rebel academic, went even further. Hapgood proposed the existence of an advanced ancient civilization with maritime navigation and aerial cartography capabilities. He published maps of the ancient kings of the sea in 1966, arguing that the Piri-Reis map was just one of many anomalies that pointed to a forgotten technological culture that flourished before the last glaciation. Hapgood's theory was eventually supported by Albert Einstein, who wrote the preface to his book. This isn't a fringe theory. It's Einstein. Now, the majority response was quick and dismissive. Skeptics claim that the map simply misrepresents the eastern coast of South America, and that any resemblance to Antarctica is pure coincidence. That the Piri-Reis may have misinterpreted ancient maps showing mythical southern continents, what cartographers called terra australis incognita. But that doesn't add up. The precision is too specific, and the implications are too profound. Because if part of that map accurately shows Antarctica's coast without ice, then the original material must predate the last glacial maximum, approximately 12,000 years ago, when Antarctica was warm enough to be partially ice-free, which means someone mapped it back then, someone with global navigation, someone with knowledge of spherical geometry, someone who left maps, not myths. And Piri-Reis wasn't alone. Other ancient maps also show similar anomalies. The Orontius Phineas map, drawn in 1531, shows an ice-free Antarctica, with rivers and mountains matching the subglacial terrain discovered centuries later. The Bloch map, from 1737, based on even older sources, shows the continent divided by a central waterway, exactly what modern science has since revealed under kilometers of ice. These maps aren't the product of wild guesses. They come from something else, from another place. That other place could be Atlantis. It could be Lemuria. It could be a lost, seafaring culture bordering the southern oceans when mammoths still roamed. Whoever they weren't primitive. They were cartographers. And cartographers don't work with myths. They work with mathematics. Which raises a disturbing question. Why would such maps even exist? Plotting a coast requires more than just a glance. You have to navigate, measure, and map it. A map like Piri-Reis implies systematic exploration, not accidental discovery. It implies civilization, infrastructure, a purpose. And if this knowledge was transmitted, copied and recopied over millennia, preserved as sacred geometry, then perhaps we've been looking in the wrong places. Perhaps history is not a straight line. Perhaps it is a circle, a cycle, a wheel that spins civilization and drowns it when it grows too large. We like to think that we are at the cusp, the top of the pyramid. But the map of Piri-Reis is a crack in the foundations of that pyramid. It suggests that, long ago, someone else was where we are now, looking at the stars, measuring the coasts, and observing how the sea approached their doors. It also suggests that we are not recovering knowledge. We are remembering it, that we are not pioneers. We are survivors, and perhaps not the first. Because if someone mapped Antarctica 12,000 years ago, what else did they know? What else did they see? What other messages did they leave behind? Perhaps not on paper, but in stone, in underwater ruins, in places where no one has dared to dig. Like the rocky platform off the coast of Japan, where divers found a ladder in the depths. A monument or a mirage. A place called Yanani. The Yanani Monument. The sea keeps secrets. It erases borders, blurs timelines, and devours the records of civilizations with the same indifference with which it swallows ships. But from time to time, something rebels. Something refuses to be forgotten. Off the coast of Japan, under the crystal-clear blue waters of the East China Sea, a ladder awaits. Carved in stone, submerged in silence. Known throughout the world as the Yonaguni Monument, it is one of the most controversial and fascinating archaeological mysteries ever discovered. And it shouldn't be there. Let's go back. In 1986, a local diver named 𝐦𝐨𝐤𝐤 explored the waters near Yonaguni, the westernmost inhabited island of the Japanese Ryukyu archipelago. He was looking for hammerhead sharks. Instead, he found the historical equivalent of a middle finger, a huge formation under the waves, symmetrical, rectangular, not scattered debris or a coral-covered relic. An authentic monument, a stone structure 50 meters long, 20 wide and 30 high, with stairs, platforms, and right angles that defied coincidence. The news spread quickly. Soon, Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of Osaka, joined the search. Stone structure 50 meters long, 20 meters wide, and 27 meters high, with stairs, platforms, and right angles that defied coincidence. The news spread quickly. Soon, Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of Ryukyu, took over the case. He studied the site for more than a decade and did not mince words. He called it artificial. He pointed out stairs, pillars, roads, what looked like a ceremonial platform, masonry that suggested planning, not randomness, and distinct but present carvings. He christened it the Atlantis of Japan. Kimura's findings unleashed a storm because, if he was right, Yonaguni was not only an archaeological oddity, but it altered the timeline. Conventional archaeology places the development of a complex civilization in Japan around 3000 BC, with the 𝐥𝐤 culture. But the Yonaguni Monument, if it were artificial, would have been built at least 10,000 years ago, before the end of the last ice age, when sea level was hundreds of meters lower and Yonaguni was part of a larger landmass. That places the construction, conservatively, around 800 BC. And that is a problem, because according to the traditional narrative, human beings of that time were still learning to survive. There were no megaliths or complex architecture, only small scattered bands of hunter-gatherers eking out a living with stone tools and bonfires. They were not supposed to build monuments facing the sea with stepped terraces and precise, right angles. And, nevertheless, there they are. The skeptics did not take long to react. Many affirm that Yonaguni is a natural formation, a result of the fracture of the sandstone along horizontal planes and vertical joints, a kind of geological origami. Nothing more than submarine pareidolia, human beings that see patterns where there are none. But that argument falls apart when one looks closely. There are characteristics in Yonaguni that nature simply cannot explain well. Perfectly flat surfaces, 90-degree corners, uniform height steps, columns that seem to have been separated from the base stone, and a series of structural elements that seem to align along north, south, east, and west axes, like the alignments of ancient temples. Then there is the face, a section of the monument that seems to represent a humanoid profile, angular and worn, but deliberate. Nearby, there is what some believe to be inscriptions, not modern graffiti, but ancient engravings worn by time and tides. Kimura's investigation suggests that the site could include not only the main monument, but an entire submerged city with roads, walls, gates, and canals in the form of ditches. If he is right, then we are not facing a simple structure. We are facing a metropolis, a city that sank under the sea not over centuries, but in a single catastrophic event, a flood. And here that number appears again. 10,000 AC, the end of the most recent Dus era, the rise in the level of the oceans, the flood that appears in all mythologies from Sumeria to the Mayans, passing through the dream time of the Aborigines. If Yonaguni is real, it is not the only one. Underwater ruins around the world lurk on the limits of plausibility. In the Cat Gulf, in India, there are stone structures at 40 meters depth. In the Caribbean, roads and submerged walls in front of the coast of Cuba. In the Mediterranean, underwater temples off the coast of Malta. Into the Bahamas, Bimini Road, a stone road that seems too straight to be accidental. And they all point backwards to an era before the flood, to an era in which the seas were lower and the ice was still locked in polar tombs. And humanity, we dare admit, was doing something extraordinary. Here is the crux of the matter. If 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐞 was built before the flood, then it predates not only Japanese civilization, but most of human history as we know it. It completely turns the script around. It means that civilization did not emerge from barbarism. It means that it returned after a trauma. It means that what we call prehistory is not a void. It is a hole in memory, a deliberate oblivion. Because if 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐞 were real, we would have to rewrite the textbooks. Admit that someone, some culture, some people had engineering knowledge, planning capacity, and the collective will to sculpt monuments in the rock at a time, when, supposedly, we were all still hunting deer in the forests. And the true horror, they were exterminated. Their cities were flooded, their languages were lost, their names were erased, and we forgot them. Or rather, they made us forget because monuments do not survive floods. It is not frequent, but when they do, they tend to whisper. And 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐞 whispers like a ghost with unfinished business. It says, we were here, we built, we saw what was coming. And perhaps that is the thread that binds everything together. From Atlantis to 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞, from Lemuria to the Piri race map, from Noah's Ark to the Tower of Babel, a world older than we think, smarter than we believe, and more lost than we can understand, but not entirely gone. Because 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐞 stands 23 meters underwater, untouched by modern tools, preserved in stillness, and challenges us to explain it. But the ocean will not easily reveal its secrets, because what lies beneath the waves is not only stone. It is memory, and memory, when it rises to the surface, always asks a question. What else have we forgotten? Because the next mystery is not just about memory. It is about knowledge. Forbidden, celestial, delivered by beings who fell from the sky and taught man to look beyond the stars and into the abyss. The Enochian knowledge. Before the flood, before Babel, before the pyramid and the ark, there lived a man named Enoch. And, unlike so many others in ancient tradition, Enoch did not die. He disappeared. Enoch walked with God. Then he ceased to exist because God took him. That is all the book of Genesis says. Just a cryptic phrase, a thread hanging from the edge of prehistory. But that thread leads somewhere strange, somewhere deep. Because Enoch is not just another prophet in sandals. He is the key to a war over knowledge. And his story may hold one of the most terrifying secrets from before the flood. To understand Enoch, we must leave behind the Bible and open the book of Enoch, an extensive apocryphal text forbidden in the biblical canon, but preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. It is a book that reads less like sacred scripture and more like cosmic science fiction. It introduces us to the Watchers, a group of 200 angels sent to Earth to watch over humanity. Spoiler, they did not just observe. They fell. They took wives from among human women. They taught forbidden knowledge. They created monsters. They created giants. And they unleashed a war in heaven. The story of the Watchers, narrated by 𝐦𝐤𝐧𝐭 and 𝐦𝐨, seems like a dump of mythological technology. These celestial beings not only corrupted humanity with lust, they corrupted us with information. They taught metallurgy, how to forge weapons, how to work gold. They taught astrology to read the stars. They taught enchantments, how to cut roots, the art of the sword, the painting of eyes. They taught secrets for which we were unprepared. It's all in the book of Enoch, a breakdown of human elevation that sounds suspiciously like a crash course in civilization. In one generation, humanity went from sticks and stones to polished swords and stargazing. And the price, a cataclysm. God, enraged by the mixture of the divine and the mortal, unleashed the flood. But here is the part that most people overlook. Enoch did not side with the rebels. He was the messenger. He was the one the angels turned to when their plans began to fail. He was the intercessor, the one who spoke for earth to heaven and for heaven to earth. The 𝐤𝐤, the translator, and then, according to the text, he was taken, not killed, nor buried, but taken alive to the heavens, where he was shown secrets that no man should see, and he was transformed. He became the archangel Metatron. It is not an allegory. It is the story. Enoch, a mortal man, becomes something more. The scribe of God, a knower of mysteries. He writes 366 books of divine knowledge. They are hidden. They are sealed and dangerous. Let's pause. Why was this story excluded from Bible? Why was the book of Enoch forbidden? Because it doesn't quite fit. It breaks the ordered moral narrative. It introduces cosmic war, genetic manipulation, and a pre-flood story that has nothing to do with sin. It is about a race for knowledge. In Enochian, knowledge is not only technical spirituality. It alludes to a lost science, a pre-flood technology, a cosmic protocol for creation itself. And some believe that fragments survived. In the story of Enoch, he is shown a place called the Crystal Heaven, a dimension of rotating wheels and shining stones, a place that sounds less like paradise and more like a hyperdimensional server room. He sees the tree of life shining with knowledge. He is shown the warehouses of the sun and the moon, the mechanisms of weather, the architecture of the cosmos. They are not parables. They are schemes. He writes it all down. And those writings, according to Legendary, are hidden in the earth, in vaults under mountains, in lost cities, in forgotten temples, and perhaps in DNA. Because the knowledge of Watchers was not only intellectual, it was biological. The Nephilim, hybrid descendants of angels and humans, were not just giants. They were anomalies, aberrations, the result of fusion of codes between celestial and terrestrial genomes. Genesis calls them mighty men of old, men of renown. Enoch calls them abominations. And when the flood came, it was not to cleanse sin. It was to erase the hard drive, to drown all data. But as always, some files survived. There are rumors in all cultures, throughout centuries, of secret lineages, of families carrying fragments of forbidden memories, of ancient libraries sealed under pyramids, of monks preserving books written in unknown languages, of keys. The term 𝐸𝐚𝐽𝐻 reappeared in the 16th century, when the infamous occultist John Dort, astrologer of Queen Elizabeth, and his partner Edward Kelly, claimed to have received a new language from the angel Uriel. They called it the language of angels. They said it was the language that was spoken before Babel, before the fall, before the flood. They called it 𝐸𝐚𝐽𝐻. It had its own grammar, syntax, and dictionary. Dee claimed that it was the language Adam used in Eden, the pure, divine language. He used it to communicate with beings he called Watchers. Coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps Dee discovered something older than he thought. The idea that language is more than words, that it is a technology so rooted in the Enochian myths, that speech shapes reality. The names are not just labels, they're functions, spells, lines of code in the operating system of the universe. This is not religion. It is programming. Enoch is not just a prophet. He is a programmer. And his books, manuals of divine architecture. Then where are they? Some say that fragments exist in Ethiopia, where the Book of Enoch was preserved. Others say that they lie under the sands of Egypt or sealed inside the Ark of the Covenant. And others, much stranger, say that the knowledge has been internalized, codified in myths, in sacred geometry, in plans of temples and stellar maps, in symbols transmitted from generation to generation by priests and secret societies. The eye, the pyramid, the network. But the most chilling idea is, what if the knowledge of Enoch was not lost? What if it has been waiting, hidden, latent, in the hands of a few, or buried in places that we have not yet dared to excavate? What if the giants, the Watchers, the technologies, all form part of the same story? Not only a story, but a warning. Because knowledge, when too powerful, becomes a curse, a flame stolen from the gods, a weapon. And if the flood was aimed at restarting the world, what will happen when we recover the knowledge that unleashed it? What will happen when the vaults are opened? When we read the books that Enoch left, because if the past teaches us anything, it is that certain truths once known, can never be forgotten. And the next mystery does not reside in the text or in the symbols. It resides in the earth, in skeletons taller than the doors, in bones too big to belong to someone, in the shadows of giants, giant skeletons prior to the flood. Imagine you are digging in your backyard. It is any afternoon. You hit something hard. You keep digging. A little more earth, a little more bone. Then you realize that it is a femur with a human shape, but the size of a baseball bat. You panic. You dig faster. The skeleton emerges. 36 meters tall, wide skull, enormous hands, teeth like river stones. Then before the authorities arrive, someone else does. They confiscate the remains. You never hear anything again, and neither does the world. This story is one of the variations that have circulated for more than a century. Rumors of giant skeletons unearthed from mounds, caves, deserts, stories of bones too big to be human, of skulls with 2 rows of teeth, of elongated skulls, and ancient weapons too heavy for a man to lift. Skeptics laugh, but the stories persist. Why? Because there is something buried in the earth that should not be there. And it is not just once, it is everywhere. Let's start with the newspaper clippings. Between the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, hundreds of articles were published in American newspapers detailing the discovery of giant skeletons throughout North America. In Wisconsin, skeletons of 3 meters with 2 rows of teeth were found. In West Virginia, the burial mounds revealed beings with enormous skulls and copper ornaments. In the Aleutian Islands, an explorer claimed to have unearthed a 14-ton skeleton with armor. Some of these stories were hoaxes. Undoubtedly, the 19th century loved fantastic stories, but some were not. And that is where things get complicated, because some of these findings were documented, photographed, cataloged, and then disappeared. The Smithsonian Institution often appears mentioned in these accounts. The same phrase always follows. The skeletons were sent to the Smithsonian and never seen again. Conspiracy, perhaps. But consider this point. The Smithsonian's own annual reports from the late 19th century mention large skeletons found in burial mounds. The anthropologists of the time openly debated whether these remains represented a different race, a lost culture, or just a forgotten genetic anomaly. And then, like clockwork, the topic vanishes. It disappears from academic discussion, forgotten by public memory. Disinfected. Why? Because the existence of giants not only alters history, it destroys it. If a race of humans, let's call them Homo colossus, ever walked Earth, we're not talking about a few isolated cases. We're talking about a parallel lineage, a completely different branch of human history. And it's not just a Western myth. In the Bible, the Nephilim are described as the mighty men of old, renowned men. Giants born from a union of the sons of God and daughters of men. In the book of Enoch, these hybrids become violent, monstrous cannibals. They consume all resources. They provoke wars. Their mere existence is one reason why the flood was sent. In Greek mythology, there are the Titans, semi-divine beings who ruled before the Olympians. In Norse mythology, the Jotuns precede the gods. In the Hindu scriptures, the gigantic warrior clans of the 𝐦𝐤𝐬𝐷s and the 𝐷𝑗𝑛𝑎vas were exterminated in ancient battles. Native American tribes speak of red-haired giants who lived in America before their ancestors' arrival. The Paiutes speak of the cannibal race 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐤, of gigantic humans who ended up trapped in caves and burned alive. In all cultures, on all continents, the memory endures. The details change, but the form stays the same. Someone huge was here and died screaming. So where are the bones? Some are found in museums, mislabeled, hidden, or discredited. Others may be locked away in private collections. Others may have been destroyed to preserve a dominant narrative. But a few, very few, remain in public view. In Ecuador, Father Carlos Vaca unearthed bones that seem to belong to human beings over 2 meters tall. The bones were exhibited in a local museum for years until they were abruptly confiscated and disappeared into the vaults of the investigation. In Sardinia, locals speak of giant skeletons found in the prehistoric tombs of Domus Daon, excavated on slopes. The farmers who tried reporting it were discredited and threatened. In the Caucasus Mountains, explorers claimed to have found burial chambers with sarcophagi large enough to house men twice our size. And in Lovelock Cave, in Nevada, early 20th century guano miners reportedly discovered mummified remains of red-haired giants over 24 meters tall. The bones were sent to the University of California. The records of their existence vanished. Why the silence? Because the implications are nuclear. If the giants existed, especially if they predated the flood, as myths insist, then we are not alone on the family tree. We are not the cusp. We are the survivors. The flood was not just to end sin. It was to end them, because the Nephilim, according to ancient texts, were not only large, they were unnatural. They were born of forbidden unions. They carried the corrupt DNA of the Watchers. They were proof that heaven had invaded earth, and their presence was intolerable. So the flood arrived, and with it the myth of a great reset. But not all of them were destroyed. Genesis 6 verse 4 mentions the phrase, "There were giants on the earth in those days and thereafter." What does this mean? It means that the lineage continued, in small groups, in fragments, in hidden valleys and deep caves and secret cults, in kings and warlords and blood rites. It means that the Nephilim did not vanish. They went underground, and maybe, just maybe, some still walk among us. They no longer measure 36 meters. They are not obvious, but altered. They are tall, powerful, with instincts older than language. And if that sounds like fantasy, ask yourself, why do all cultures remember them? Why do their bones keep appearing? Why does the official story keep changing? Because the existence of giants challenges more than archaeology. It challenges identity. It says that we're not the first, strongest, or most advanced. It says that we are heirs of a world built by bigger hands. Hands that once shaped stone, wielded weapons, wrote forbidden texts, and ruled nations. But even giants fall, and when they do, they leave echoes in the myths, in the monuments, in the bones. Which brings us to the Sphinx, a lion with a human face, a monument older than its own civilization, and that may have seen the flood arrive and remember the rain, the hypothesis of the erosion by the water of the Sphinx. It is on the edge of the desert, like a puzzle half solved. Half beast, half human, silent, watchful, with a smile that could be a warning or mockery. The Great Sphinx of Giza. Most tourists admire its majesty and take photos without asking questions. They're told that it was built around 2500 BC. BC by the pharaoh Khafre during the 4th dynasty, just another piece of the monumental puzzle called Ancient Egypt. That fits perfectly into the timeline like a hieroglyph carved in stone. But the Sphinx does not fit. Not in style, scale, or erosion. And that is where the mystery begins. In the 1990s, an unassuming geologist named Dr. Robert Schulk arrived at the Giza Plateau with a skeptical mind and trained eye. He was not there to rewrite history. He just wanted to examine the wear patterns on the famous monument. What he saw left him frozen. The Sphinx, especially the enclosure that surrounds it, did not show the typical erosion of the desert. It did not present the horizontal striations one would expect after 4,500 years of Egyptian sandstorms. Instead, it showed signs of vertical erosion, erosion from water and heavy rains. But the Giza Plateau has been completely dry for the last 5,000 years. The arid climate of the Egyptian desert did not begin yesterday. It has been like this since before the pharaohs raised their first obelisk. So, where did all that water come from? Schul's conclusion was heresy in academic circles. He proposed that the Sphinx was not built in 2500 BC, but in 10,000 BC, possibly even earlier. A relic from an era in which the Sahara was not a desert, but savanna, a time in which seasonal rains lashed the region with the type of precipitation necessary to excavate those deep channels in the limestone. He presented his findings, geology, not speculations, measurements, patterns, comparisons, and the response of the Egyptologists. Silence, then laughter, then fury, because the implications were explosive. If the Sphinx is older than dynastic Egypt, then everything we think we know about the origins of civilization crumbles. The Fourth Dynasty did not build it. They found it. Like illegal occupants in the ruins of a lost world. This is no longer a fringe theory. The findings of 𝐥𝐤 were backed by Professor Thomas 𝐦𝐨𝐫𝐞, a geophysicist who confirmed the subterranean erosion consistent with extreme and prolonged rains. And they were not the first to suggest this. The French mystic and mathematician 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐸 observed the same in the 1950s. He called the monument a cosmic machine preserved by rituals, misunderstood through time. Others have pointed out the disproportionate scale of the Sphinx's head, too small for its enormous body, as if it had been carved later, which raises a disturbing possibility. The Sphinx that we see today is a renovation. The original may have had a different face. Some believe that it was a lion, symbol of the constellation Leo. If that is true, then the Sphinx could have been aligned with the celestial cycles that go back to 10,500 BC, when Leo rose on the horizon in the spring equinox. That date again, the end of the Younger Dryas, the end of the last ice age, the same period to which Plato refers for the fall of Atlantis, the same period in which the sea level rose, megaliths were buried, and myths were born. So what was the original Sphinx? A monument to power? A celestial marker? A survivor? The Sphinx is not only old, but out of place. Unlike other Egyptian statues, it lacks inscriptions, it has no cartouches, there is no record of who commissioned it, nor dedication. It is only an enormous silent sentinel that watches over the pyramids, whose own mysteries are still debated. And here is where the rabbit hole opens. Because if the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt, it means that someone built monuments of divine proportions in an era in which, according to textbooks, human beings still lived in mud huts and were discovering agriculture. It means that there was a civilization before civilization, a global culture, advanced, organized, and with cosmic knowledge. And then came the flood, a literal and metaphorical flood that cleaned the canvas. But the Sphinx remained, partially buried, partially eroded, yet intact, waiting. Egyptian legend echoes this idea. The inventory stele, a little-known tablet, affirms that the pharaoh Khufu did not build the Sphinx, but rather repaired it. That was already old in his time, that it belonged to the gods. Even the name Sphinx is Greek. The ancient Egyptians called it Horus, Horus of the horizon, a guardian, a watcher, which takes us to another mystery. The stele erected between the legs of the Sphinx by Thutmose for around 1400 BC. The stele tells a dreamlike story. In it, the young prince falls asleep next to the monument and receives a visit from the Sphinx in a dream. The Sphinx promises him the crown if he clears the sand that covers his body, a buried statue, a divine messenger, a test of memory. What if the dream wasn't fiction? What if Thutmose found something? What if there was something else buried below? Some researchers believe that below the Sphinx there are hidden chambers. The subterranean anomalies detected by ground-penetrating radar point to hollows, tunnels, and rooms sealed since time immemorial. The Egyptian authorities deny access, but rumors persist. Some say the room of records lies there. A legendary archive of antediluvian knowledge, wisdom accumulated from civilization lost to time and tides. A stone library. Madness. Then explain the alignment, the erosion, the absence of inscriptions, the disproportionate head, and the astronomical connections and oral traditions. The Sphinx, like many ancient monuments, offers no explanations. It offers questions. Difficult, sharp questions carved in limestone and abandoned to the elements for millennia. And the most important question, if the Sphinx is a survivor of a forgotten civilization, what else survived? Because a 73-meter monument is not carved for fun. It is carved to remember, to warn, or both. And if this remains on the surface, what is under the waves? What lost cities exist? What submerged temples lie there? What forgotten plans await in silence? Because the next mystery isn't only carved in stone, it is drawn on the desert. Enormous, precise, and still visible from the sky. A message from the ancients engraved into the earth itself. The Nazca lines as survivors of flood. In the deserts of southern Peru, engraved on the high Andean plateau, are some of the most puzzling works of art on Earth. Enormous geometric figures, straight lines stretching for kilometers. Giant animals, monkeys, hummingbirds, spiders carved with precision, visible only from the sky. They're the Nazca lines, and they make little sense. They were not built for the living. They were not carved for a casual observer. You could be in the middle of a 100-meter glyph and never know it. The only way to understand them and truly grasp their shapes is from thousands of meters high. Which leads to an obvious question. Who were they for? Let's begin with the basics. Conventional archaeology attributes the Nazca lines to the Nazca people, a pre-Inca culture that flourished around 100 AC and 800 DC. Supposedly, they created the lines by removing the oxidized top layer of rock, revealing lighter earth underneath. No chisels, no paint, just subtraction. But the scale is amazing. There are over 800 straight lines, some up to 30 m long, 300 geometric shapes, 70 biomorphic figures, all engraved in a desert region the size of Manhattan. All preserved with amazing sharpness thanks to the dry, windless climate. The lines form triangles, trapezoids, zigzags. They cross, intersect, overlap each other. Some scholars suggest they were ceremonial walkways. Others say they were astronomical alignments for solstices and equinoxes. Others propose they were irrigation maps that guided water through sacred rituals. But no theory explains the central, puzzling fact. Why would a culture without aviation, high-altitude observation, or drones design geoglyphs that only make sense from the sky? Not even the Incas, centuries later, reference them. And that's where the flood theory enters. Because maybe the Nazca lines aren't from Nazca at all. Maybe they're older, much more ancient. Let's talk about dating. The official chronology places the construction of the Nazca lines around the year 500 A.D.C. But this is based on ceramics found nearby, not on the lines themselves. You cannot directly carbon date a groove in the ground. So, what if the lines predate the Nazca culture? What if they were already old when the Nazca found them? We have seen this pattern before in Göbekli Tepe, in Baalbek, and the Sphinx. Cultures that inherit megalithic ruins, reuse sacred places, build on mystery. So, let's entertain a forbidden thought. What if the Nazca lines are survivors? Not of the Nazca people, but of a cataclysm, a map, a record, a message from before the flood. The high deserts of Peru are among the driest places on Earth. The average precipitation is less than 1 millimeter yearly. However, when the Ice Age ended, the sea level rose drastically. The rivers overflowed, entire landscapes shifted, but the Nazca Plateau remained dry. It stayed preserved. Therefore, if an advanced civilization wanted to leave a message for the future, something that would not wash away, would not rot, would not disappear, it could have chosen this place. It could have chosen to write on the earth on a scale only visible from the sky. Think of the lines. The 93-meter wide hummingbird. The 50-meter long spider drawn with precise anatomical details that include reproductive organs not visible without dissection. The monkey with its tail in a spiral and its limbs extended in a pose so stylized, so calculated, that it resembles a glyph more than an animal. They are not cave paintings. They are schemes. Then there are the straight lines. Some stretch for kilometers, straight as a laser, without hesitating, without deviating, without respecting the terrain. They cross hills, go down valleys, cross rocky terrain. They do not mark roads. They mark something else. Flight paths, energy lines, celestial alignments. Some researchers like Eric von Daniken have suggested that the lines were designed to serve as aerial guidance, runways, or visual beacons for beings traveling through the air. But we don't need extraterrestrials for the mystery to be real. We only need a lost civilization, a culture that understood scale, precision, geometry, one that lived before the last convulsion, one that knew that the flood would come and decided to leave behind its history, not in books or temples, but in a language of the earth and space. The Nazca lines might not be writing. They could be memory. There's also the tempting presence of underground aquifers below the lines. Some figures appear to be located directly above underground water sources. Was that a coincidence, or were the lines a kind of hydrological diagram? An ancient map of water energy. Energy. Spiritual energy. Something deeper. Paul Kosick, one of the first researchers of the lines, called them the largest astronomy book in the world. Maria Reich, who spent decades preserving and studying them, believed they were a calendar. But what kind of calendar covers 32 kilometers? What kind of ritual requires a glyph the size of a soccer field? And who travels a ritual path they can never see? That is the secret. The lines were not made for people on land. They were made for the sky. Perhaps not for the airplanes. Perhaps not for the gods, but for time, for memory, to jump forward through the centuries, for the servos to look down someday and wonder who did this, why, and what they wanted us to remember. Here is another detail. There are other geoglyphs across the planet. In the Atacama Desert, in Chile, the giant of Atacama, an enormous humanoid figure more than 300 feet tall. In the United Kingdom, the White Horse of Uffington, 3,000 years old, carved into a chalk hill. In Kazakhstan, a series of enormous embankments forming triangles, squares, and crosses, discovered only in the era of satellite images. They all say the same thing. Look up. Look down. Do not forget it. We were here. We saw the flood coming. We tried to warn you. And perhaps we left more than warnings. Because the Nazca lines are not just art. They are evidence, not only of the existence of people, but of intention. An intention that encompasses generations. An intention that transcends catastrophe. And an intention that suggests something even more disturbing. If the ancients carved such precise, enormous, and lasting messages, what else did they leave behind? What else lies beneath our feet, hidden under the sea or written in the stars? Because the next mystery is not on land. It waits beneath the waves off the western coast of India, where mythical city is said to have stood before the ocean rose. And some say its ruins are still there, submerged, silent, and very real. The submerged cities of the Indian coast, Dwara. The waves that wash the western coast of India are warm, gentle, and rhythmic. To the casual observer, they seem eternal and unchanged for centuries. But beneath the calm lies a secret. A city lost to time, preserved beneath the Arabian Sea. A city that should not exist, Dwara. For Hindus, it is one of the most sacred cities. The kingdom of the god Krishna, a place of divine splendor described in the Mahabharata as a fortress made of gold, silver, and precious stones with imposing palaces, wide avenues, and an intricate port system that connected it to the outside world. And according to legend, it was destroyed, not by fire or war, but by the ocean. It is said that the sea rose in one night and swallowed the city completely. For millennia, it was a myth, a legend recited in temples, depicted in tapestries, and whispered among monks until 2001. That year, the National Institute of Ocean Technology, in collaboration with the Marine Archaeology Unit of the National Institute of Oceanography of India, discovered something incredible. Off the coast of present-day Dwarine, in the Gulf of Katsanar, scanners revealed geometric patterns on seabed. These were not random rock formations or coral reefs, but outlines of a city. Grids, streets, building foundations, and even what appeared to be a huge wall or dock system stretching almost 8 kilometers. Artifacts were dredged from the site. Fragments of ceramics, fossilized wood, stone tools. A sample of char material was dated back more than 9,000 years. If exact, that places the origin of this city around 7500 BC. BC, thousands of years before the Harappan civilization, before the pyramids, Sumer, or any known civilization on Earth. Think about this well. A planned, populated, and technologically advanced city that existed at a time when history insists that human beings still collected berries and barely learned to plant wheat. Conventional historians quickly responded. They suggested natural formations, ancient riverbeds, but the layout was too structured and intentional. And if the site is truly old, even a precursor, then everything we thought we knew about civilization's cradle is wrong. Because the ancient texts of India do not just hint at the greatness of their origins. They shout it to all winds. The Mahabharata and the Puranas speak of high technology, flying machines called vimanas, weapons mimicking nuclear explosions, cities shining with an unnatural glow. They are not metaphors from a primitive culture. They are echoes of something more, something older, something real. The legend of 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐤 fits the flood narration with precision. According to the Mahabharata, after Krishna's departure from the world, the city was abandoned, and then the sea flooded it and erased it. Not slowly or gradually, but in a single overwhelming gesture, a flood. Which raises the question, was 𝐦𝐨𝐻 destroyed by the same global event that took Atlantis, Lemuria, and so many other lost cultures? The timing is suspicious. About 10,000 years ago, Earth suffered one of history's most dramatic climate changes. The polar ice caps melted completely. The sea level rose by more than 120 meters. The islands disappeared entirely. The coasts were redrawn as if a cartographer had gone mad. If a civilization had flourished in what is now the bottom of the ocean, it would have been wiped out without a trace. Unless that trace has survived, unless someone built to last, 𝐦𝐨𝐻 might not be alone. Other underwater sites have been identified along the Indian coast. In Tamil Nadu, off the city of Mahabalipuram, divers have found a submerged temple structure echoing the legend of the 7 pagodas, where only one temple remains above sea level. Further south, in the Bay of Bengal, lies the buried ancient port city of 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐤. Stone structures, maritime walls, columns, all submerged under 9 meters of water. And, again, local legends spoke of the sea taking the city long before science confirmed it. Again, the same pattern emerges. The myth speaks first always. Science discovers it centuries later. But 𝐦𝐨𝐻 is different here. It was never just a whispered legend. It was a central node in one of the world's most enduring religious traditions. Krishna was not a demigod destined for being forgotten. He is still revered by hundreds of millions. His city was not an afterthought either. It was a capital city, and its destruction was not just tragic alone. It was prophetic too, because 𝐦𝐨𝐻 was not just any city. It was a symbol, a beacon of divine and human cooperation, a center of knowledge and spiritual power. And its disappearance was not only due to tectonic activity or sea level changes. It was about erasing the past, about a cosmic reset. And like Atlantis, the story does not end in chaos, but in mystery. Because 𝐦𝐨𝐻, like many pre-flood sites, does not disappear completely. It leaves traces on sonar, on stone, and in scriptures. And the most disturbing thing is that we are just beginning to rediscover these. For centuries, the idea of submerged civilizations was a fantasy dismissed by academics, relegated to fiction. Now there is data from sonars, satellite images, and carbon dating. The cities are there, the stories converge, the temporal lines collapse. And the Indian coast may be the most important piece of the puzzle because it suggests that high civilization was not a coincidence. It was global. It arose before the flood's end. It fell with it, but not entirely. Not everywhere. Because for each city that the ocean swallowed, there may be another under the jungle, the desert, the ice waiting. And perhaps the flood not only drowned the ancient world, perhaps it pushed it literally underground. Because the next mystery is not in the sea. It is found in stone, in cyclopean blocks and impossible architecture, in megaliths, so enormous that we still cannot explain how they were constructed. Structures that scream of a forgotten technology of minds that move mountains, of builders that we no longer remember. Megaliths prior to the flood around the world. They rise from earth like the bones of the planet itself. Ancient, immovable, strange. Enormous stone slabs that weigh tens, even hundreds of tons, arranged with such precision that modern engineers shrug in defeat. They're the world's megaliths before the flood, scattered across the continents like breadcrumbs leading to a lost civilization. Baalbek, Saki, Huaman, Ollantaytambo, Pumapunku, Stonehenge, Grandeur, Shriya, Gongpadong. The names vary, the stone remains. And the question that resonates in each monolith is this: How, how could people without pulleys, without cranes, without wheels, and in many cases without writing, move stones that current technology cannot even move? Let's start with Baalbek in Lebanon. The Temple of Jupiter was built by the Romans. That is the story. But the Romans built on something else, something older, something huge. The base of the temple is the trilithon. 3 stones, each more than 800 tons, stacked like Lego bricks by titans. Nearby is the stone of the pregnant woman of 1,000 tons. That is more than 4 fully loaded Boeing 747s, carved, moved, and placed. Nobody knows how. There is no evidence that the Romans had the capacity or even interest to move stones of that size. They built with smaller blocks. They used what they had. They did not need such large stones. Nobody needed them, unless the stones were not destined for temples, unless they were remains of something else, something older, something from before the flood. Because here is the question of the megaliths. They do not fit into the temporal line. Conventional history tells us that civilization began about 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. That is when people supposedly began to organize, to build, to write. But the megaliths do not care about that narrative. They are everywhere, and they are older. In Peru, the walls of Sacsayhuaman are made of interlocking stones, each weighing up to 200 tons. The stones fit so perfectly that not even a blade can slide between them. Without mortar, without gaps, only pieces of a tectonic puzzle placed in their place. They do not correspond to Inca architecture. The Incas themselves said that they did not build them. They said that they were already there when they arrived. And they were right. Going deeper into the Andes, we arrive at the fortress of 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐬 with similar stones, similar precision, and a similar problem. The stone quarries are kilometers away. On the other side of a river, on a mountain, the terrain is impossible. Non-existent methods, unless they had help, knowledge, or both. Then there is 𝐵𝐺 in Bolivia, a site so strange and precise that even the most staunch skeptics stop. HB blocks cut with mechanical precision, holes drilled in andesite, stone harder than granite. Perfect 90-degree angles, intricate notches that look like they were made with modern saws, not copper chisels. Archaeologists date 𝐵𝐺 to around the year 500 AC, but the site is located on a floodplain. A layer of sediment covers the remains of the ruins from a massive flood, which could date from the end of the Ice Age. And once again, the locals say they did not build it. They say it was built by the gods, a story that is repeated throughout the world. In Japan, the Ishino-Hoden is a megalithic block of Maruoka stone weighing more than 500 tons and carved into a cliff with surgical precision. No one knows who did it, or why or how. In Russia, Grandeur mountain contains granite blocks the size of train cars. Some estimate they weighed more than 3,000 tons. That is not a typo. 3,000 tons. They are stacked and angular, in the shape of, but not documented or explained. Because if you explain them, the timeline crumbles. The same is true in Indonesia, where Gunung Padang, long believed to be just a pile of volcanic rocks, turned out to be a man-made structure. Ground-penetrating radar showed chambers under the surface. A buried pyramid more than 9,000 years old. It is the oldest known megalithic site in Southeast Asia, and it was covered on purpose, buried like 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞 teep, like the Osirian, as if someone didn't want us to remember it, as if they were not only structures but messages. Here is the pattern. Enormous stones, impossible techniques, anomalous ages, and no one takes credit. Cultures find them, venerate them, build on them, but never claim to have made them. The builders are always gods, giants, people from the sky, beings from the early days. Perhaps the flood did not erase these monuments. Perhaps it failed. Perhaps they were designed to survive. Stone is memory, and megaliths remember. They remember a time when humans flew. Something very close had knowledge that we have forgotten. Not only force, but technology, geometry, vibration, resonance. The ancients did not only drag rocks. They moved them with intention, with a purpose. Only now are we beginning to understand the principles they may have used. Acoustic levitation, harmonic frequencies, magnetic manipulation. It is not science fiction, just science that we have not yet mastered again. Megaliths are the fossils of that knowledge, and they still stand in the jungles of Cambodia, in the islands of Micronesia, under the forests of Europe, lurking in places we have not yet found. They are not isolated wonders. They are a network, a fabric, a blueprint of a world that once existed, a world that fell but did not disappear. And perhaps the reason we keep finding them is not a coincidence. Perhaps we are destined for this. Because if you follow the megalithic trail long enough, you begin to hear echoes of language, memory, stars, and caves. Because the next mystery is not on surface. It is painted in the depths of the earth, where the first artist recorded something that no one can explain. Cave paintings and lost civilizations. Under our feet, hidden in the most silent chambers of the earth, are stories written in carbon and ochre. They were not drawn for us, but for something older that watched from the darkness. Lascaux, Chauet, Alameda, El Castillo. They're not just caves. They are cathedrals. In their silence, they scream. Herds of horses gallop in the flickering firelight. Mammoths trample the walls, bison with shadows, antelopes with eyes full of movement. An entire ecosystem engraved in stone with a precision and art that make you stop and wonder how people lived more than 30,000 years ago. How is it possible that, without metal, without formal language, without civilization as we define it, they created an art so vivid, so stylized, so deeply intelligent? Why does it look better than some modern works of art in a downtown gallery? Let's start with the 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞 cave, discovered in 1994 in the Ardèche region of France. It contains the oldest known cave paintings, dated to approximately 36,000 years. The art inside is unexplainable. Perspective, motion blur, shadows, outlines, techniques that we associate with the talent of Renaissance. And yet, it is Paleolithic. 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞 has more than 1,000 images, most of them animals. Lions, rhinoceroses, bears, not prey animals, but predators, powerful beings of mythical stature. But here is the key. The artist did not just draw. They composed. They used the contours of the cave walls to bring images to life. A bison painted on a ledge to highlight its muscles. A lion in a tilted position to suggest movement. The placement of torches made the paintings come to life with the dance of dim lights. This is not the work of cavemen. It is the work of visionaries. Now take a look at Lascaux. Discovered in 1940 by teenagers in southwestern France, Lascaux is often called the Sistine Chapel of prehistory. It is full of more than 600 paintings and 1,500 engravings. Horses, deer, bulls, spirals, dots, patterns. But there is one image that stands out. The scene of the well. It represents a man with a bird's head lying face down, a bison with its entrails spilled out, and a mysterious bird on stick. No one knows what it means. It does not fit with the hunting scenes. It does not tell a simple story. It looks like a ritual, death, transformation, or something else. Some researchers have linked it to astronomical events, alignments of constellations, celestial calendars. Others believe it may represent a shamanic journey, symbolic death and rebirth. And then there are the dots. In multiple caves throughout Europe, we find patterns of dots and lines, which are not random or decorative, but possibly symbolic. Protoidal communications that are not intended for language, but for memory. Recently, researchers at the University of Durham and the University of York have proposed that some of these marks could represent lunar calendars, an attempt to measure time, chart seasons, and coordinate rituals with cosmic rhythms. If true, it means the people who painted these caves understood not only the earth, but also the sky. And that changes everything, because lunar cycles are not measured without purpose. Calendars are not drawn unless something is organized. Days are not spent crawling through dark, dangerous caves, risking suffocation, falling rocks, and predators just to scribble. These caves were temples, chambers of memory, and perhaps warnings. Some of the oldest cave paintings, like those of El Castillo in Spain, feature hand stencils made by blowing pigment onto a hand pressed against the wall. They date back more than 40,000 years. Think about it. A human hand stretching across millennia, whispering, "I was here." But what were they warning us about? Because many of these cave systems share something else in common. They coincide with climatic instability, the end of the Ice Age, a period of mass animal extinctions, an era of floods, earthquakes, and celestial cataclysms. Art does not appear in times of peace, but in times of chaos. What if these images were not just reflections of the world? What if they were records of what had been lost? The last memory of a world before the flood. What if the artists were not primitive? What if they were the survivors? The remains of a high civilization forced to take refuge underground by a cataclysm, preserving their knowledge in the only medium that would survive, the stone. We see the same impulse across all cultures. The Mayan codices, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Sumerian tablets, all seek permanence, all fight against amnesia. Caves may be the origin not of art, but of history. And there are even deeper mysteries. Strange humanoid figures appear in some caves. They are not animals or men, but entities, figures with animal heads, exaggerated limbs, otherworldly shapes, shamans, gods, visitors. Whatever they are, they suggest something more than hunting or fertility. They suggest contact with something beyond. The Aboriginal dream time speaks of the 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐬 beings who came to Earth in the distant past. Their representations on cave walls are eerily similar to modern interpretations of aliens, with large heads, round eyes, and humanoid shapes. Are they coincidences or convergences? Did the ancients see something, or were they remembering something? Because if memory survives something, it survives in rituals, in repetition, in pigments engraved in stone. And the caves are still here, they are still speaking, they are still waiting for us to listen to them. But listening is not enough. We have to remember, because the caves are just the beginning, the threshold, the first place where we find evidence of knowledge that should not exist. But what if that knowledge did not end in the caves? What if it were preserved in devices, in objects, in relics, in machines that defied all explanation, like a clay pot containing a charge and suggesting that electricity is not modern, but ancient? The Baghdad battery and antediluvian technology. In a museum in Baghdad, sometime before the chaos of war and looting scattered its secrets to the wind, there was an object that should not exist. A clay vessel about 12 centimeters high. Simple, rough, ordinary. Except it wasn't. Inside the vessel was a copper cylinder sealed with asphalt, and inside this was a rusty iron rod. By adding vinegar or lemon juice, the set produces a small but measurable electrical charge. It is called the Baghdad battery and marks the beginning of a much larger question. Did ancient civilizations possess electrical technology? Let's set aside the conventional chronology. We are told that electricity was discovered in the 18th century. Benjamin Franklin, lightning, kites, then Volta, Faraday, Tesla, a linear progression from sparks to light bulbs and smartphones. But what if that's not the whole story? What if electricity did not begin with us? What if it was remembered, then rediscovered? In the 1930s, the Baghdad battery was found near 𝐦𝐤𝐤, a town on the outskirts of present-day Baghdad. It dates to around the year 200 A.C. during the Parthian era. That is more than 2,000 years ago. Conventional archaeologists believe that it may have been used for electroplating, using electricity to deposit a thin layer of metal on another surface. But here's the crux. We have never found galvanized artifacts in that region during that period. There are no half-finished relics, nor any evidence of a workshop using this technique. So, if not for electroplating, what was its purpose? And why are there more? Similar batteries have been found in that region. Multiple vessels show metal rods and signs of acid corrosion, enough to suggest a pattern. But the most important thing is, why build something like that if you don't understand its purpose? You don't stumble on a battery by chance. It is designed, which means that someone knew how to do it. And if someone knew about electricity in 200 AC, who taught them? Some researchers believe that the Baghdad battery was a descendant of something much older in antediluvian technology transmitted through remains, fragments, and rumors. Because the real proof of ancient electricity is not in Mesopotamia, but rather in Egypt. Let's discuss the Temple of Hathor in Dendera. Carved on the stone walls of its crypt are some strange reliefs, which can only be accessed through narrow ducts and ceremonial passageways. They show human figures holding bulbous objects that look like light bulbs. Inside the light bulbs, filaments resemble snakes. Below them appears to be a power source. Next to them is what looks like high-voltage insulation. Egyptologists call a lotus. They say the snakes represent cosmic energy, that the scene is symbolic. But electricians see much more. They see a primitive vacuum tube, a Crookes tube, an electrical discharge. In 2000, a team of engineers from Austria built a functional model of the Dendera bulb. It produced light using the same principles that were observed in the experiments of the early 19th century. No filaments, just plasma, which makes us wonder, if the ancient Egyptians did not have electricity, why do their reliefs depict devices resembling electrical diagrams? And there's more. Inside many Egyptian temples, we do not find soot or traces of torches or fire, but the walls are covered with detailed carvings that would have required precise and prolonged work in total darkness. How do they see? Perhaps polished mirrors, but mirrors cannot carry light through winding corridors. At some point, a light source is needed, and maybe the Egyptians had one. But where would they have gotten it? This leads to the idea that electrical knowledge was not invented, but inherited from a lost civilization. A civilization that used electromagnetic principles not only for lighting, but also construction, levitation, and data storage. Some of the clues are in plain sight. Take the Great Pyramid. Its internal structure includes a granite box in the king's chamber at 440 Hz. The pyramid itself is built with non-conductive limestone cladding and granite inside. Highly conductive. Some researchers believe it functioned as a huge energy transmitter, not a tomb, but a machine. The underground chamber excavated in the depths of the bedrock may have served as a resonator, capturing the natural frequencies of the Earth. This is not science fiction. It is resonant physics. Nikola Tesla believed that the Earth could conduct energy wirelessly. He built the Wardenclyffe Tower to prove it. But maybe someone did so before. And maybe the knowledge was codified into myths. Zeus and his lightning. Thor and Millionaire. Indra and Vajroth, the thunder weapon of the gods. They are not just metaphors of power. They are metaphors of electrical power. Because lightning bolts were not only impressive, they were usable if you had the right tools. The ancients seemed obsessed with static electricity, magnetic fields, and celestial alignments. They built stone circles aligned with the solstices. They placed quartz in megalithic structures. They carved symbols that we still cannot decipher. Perhaps they were not only artistic, perhaps they were building circuits, and perhaps the Baghdad Battery is just a humble vestige, the last echo of something much bigger, a civilization that once knew how to control the invisible. And when the flood came, the machines were destroyed. The knowledge was dispersed. The survivors were left with the myths and memories. But some pieces remained. The Ark of the Covenant, for example, may not have been a religious artifact, but a capacitor. The descriptions suggest that it had a powerful and dangerous charge. The people who touched it died. It emitted radiation. It was kept isolated. That is not spiritual symbolism. That is engineering. And again, who built it? Who understood it? Who transmitted the plans? Perhaps Enoch. Perhaps the Watchers. Perhaps the same ones who built Göbekli Tepe, who recorded the Nazca lines, who stacked Baalbek. And perhaps the Baghdad Battery is not the only relic. Perhaps there are others hidden in tombs, sealed in temples, locked under the sand, waiting. Because the flood not only buried cities, it also buried data. And the next mystery speaks of those who gave them to us, of those who came from above. And watch how he fell. The Watchers of the apocryphal texts. There is a story older than Genesis. A story whispered in the dark corners of forbidden libraries and written in texts that did not make it into the final version of the Bible. A story so strange, so wild, so radioactive that it was sealed for centuries, not because it was false, but because it was too dangerous. The story of the Watchers. They were not angels nor demons, but something in between. Beings of immense power, knowledge, and desire sent to observe, but who did not obey. Their story is told with vividness in the Book of Enoch. Not the Enoch of vague Genesis footnotes, but the complete saga preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and reflected in other apocryphal texts such as the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Giants of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is how it all begins. In the days before the flood, the earth was watched. A group of 200 celestial beings, angels, but not the type that play the harp and float in the clouds, were assigned to observe humanity. Their leader was 𝐤𝐨𝐬𝐬. Their mission, to watch over humanity during its infancy, guide it but never to interfere. But they did more than interfere. They fell. 𝐤𝐨𝐬𝐬 and his retinue descended on Mount Hermon and made a pact, swearing to share the same fate for what they were about to do. They took human wives. They taught forbidden knowledge. And they begot a new race, the Nephilim. Giants, monsters, tyrants. And with that act, they broke the barrier between heaven and earth. But their rebellion was not only biological. It was technological. The Watchers became gods for men, not for their wings, but for what they knew. 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐬 taught humanity the art of war, how to forge swords, knives, and shields. He introduced cosmetics, dyes, and mirrors. Yes, but psychologically transformative. 𝐤𝐨𝐬𝐬 revealed enchantments, knowledge about plants, medicinal, and possibly psychedelic roots. Others taught astrology, divination, the movement of stars, the secrets of the heavens. In a generation, humanity went from tribal survival to cosmic consciousness. The result was chaos. The Nephilim were not only tall, they were voracious. They consumed all the food. Then they began to consume men. They became violent, crazy, a corruption of flesh and spirit. The earth cried out, and the sky responded. According to Enoch, God sent the archangels Michael, Raphael, Uriel, and Gabriel to deal with the crisis. The Watchers were bound. The Nephilim were destroyed, and a flood was sent to erase the infection. But the infection did not disappear because the knowledge remained. And that knowledge was not mythical. It was mechanical. Let's analyze this. The Watchers represent a pattern in mythology, beings that descend from the sky, cross with humanity, and transmit forbidden wisdom. This story appears not only in the margins of the Bible, but in traditions around the world. In Sumeria, the Anunnaki descend from the sky and give humans writing, law, and agriculture. In Greece, the Titans rule the earth before the gods overthrow them. Prometheus gives fire to humanity and is punished eternally. In Norse mythology, Odin obtains wisdom through sacrifice. The giants built the first walls of Asgard. Loki, a hybrid god, gives birth to monsters. Even in the Popol Vuh of the Mayans, the gods create and destroy several versions of humanity before settling on one. These are not unconnected myths. They are corrupted memories of the same thing. The contact. The Watchers were not metaphors. They were an interface between the divine and the earthly. Call them angels, aliens, or architects. They gave us tools for which we were unprepared, and we destroyed the world with them. But the story does not end with the flood. Enoch tells us that 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐬 was tied in a well, covered with sharp stones, and thrown into a place of darkness until the final judgment. Some say that well is real, a sealed vault, a place known by secret orders. The Book of the Giants, recovered from the caves of 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐬, adds another layer. It describes the dreams that the Nephilim had before their destruction, visions of a flood, of the earth covered in water, of the sky's wrath. They knew it was going to happen, and they could not avoid it. But here is the part that changes everything. The texts say that some of the Watchers' descendants survived, and that part of the knowledge was preserved not only through lineages, but through architecture, symbolism, and secret societies. Let's think about the earliest priesthoods. The Egyptian Shohor, the magicians of Persia, the Chaldean astrologers, the Essenes, all claimed to have access to a superior wisdom. They all practiced rituals that imitated the descent of spirit into flesh. The marriage between heaven and earth was an echo of the Watchers. Let's fast forward to the Middle Ages and find the Kabbalists studying the divine emanations and sacred geometry. The Gnostics claimed that the God of the Bible was an inferior and corrupt being, and that secret knowledge was key to liberation. The Hermeticists believed that as above, so below, and studied alchemy, astrology, and theology. And the Masons, the Rosicrucians, and enlightened secret societies claimed to descend from the builders and guardians of ancient truth. All of them going back to the world before the flood, all whispering about a fall of divine knowledge. So what was this knowledge? Mathematics, astronomy, engineering, but also genetics, vibration, resonance. The Watchers did not give us only weapons. They gave us structure, sacred architecture, harmonic alignment. They taught us to build ziggurats, pyramids, temples, each of them a battery, a receiver, transmitter. The stone is not just stone. It is memory. The megaliths were not tombstones. They were computers designed to resonate with the planet's frequencies. That is why so many ancient sites are aligned with celestial events, not for ritual, but for functional reasons. And knowledge was not transmitted only in stone. It was encoded in myths, encrypted in rituals, buried in scriptures, waiting. Because the Watchers were not destroyed, not entirely. Some were tied, some perhaps escaped, and others were never seen again. They became the gods of the world after the flood, the bearers of culture, the legislators, the kings who ruled for thousands of years, as appears in the list of Sumerian kings. And if they still influence us, that would explain many things. The sudden technological advances, the obsession with symbols, the architecture echoing forgotten plans and dreams. Because in all traditions, forbidden knowledge comes at a price. The Watchers broke a cosmic law. They intervened, loved, taught, and paid for all. But we are heirs to their rebellion. We build rockets. We splice genes. We write codes and languages that rewrite life. We are doing again what they did then. The question is, will our end be same? Because the flood was not just a punishment. It was a contention. And the next mister in the ancient clay carries that flood forward. The story of a king who built a boat, who spoke to the gods, who survived. Before Noah, there was Utnapishtim. Before Genesis, there was Gilgamesh, the Gilgamesh flood tablet. Long before Moses parted the Red Sea, or Noah set sail with a zoological cargo, there was another story. Older, stranger, deeper, carved in clay by hands that have long since turned to dust, and spoken in a language that no longer has native speakers. It begins in Uruk between fighting gods and weeping kings. And it carries with it a flood so immense, so divine, so annihilating that it cracked the memory of the earth forever. This is the story of Gilgamesh, and it hides the oldest flood myth known to history. Let's put ourselves in the picture. Around the year 2000 AC, in ancient Mesopotamia, in present-day Iraq, a series of clay tablets with cuneiform writing were engraved and kept in royal libraries. The most complete version was discovered in Nineveh, in the ruins of the library of 𝐦𝐨𝐫𝐞, buried under centuries of rubble. There, on Tablet 11 of the Epic of Gilgamesh, we find an account that reflects Genesis with disturbing precision. But it is not a copy. It is the original, the prototype of all apocalyptic stories about the flood. And in the center is a man named Utnapishtim. In the epic, Gilgamesh, grieving over the death of his friend Enkidu and tormented by mortality, seeks Utnapishtim, the only man who survived the great flood and to whom the gods granted immortality. What follows is a story within a story. Utnapishtim recounts the moment when the gods decided to erase humanity. Why? Because humanity had become noisy, chaotic, with too many prayers, too many sacrifices, too much humanity. So the gods, in their divine irritation, decided to drown the world. But one of them, warned Utnapishtim, although not directly. He whispered the message to a reed wall. He told Utnapishtim to build a boat, to waterproof it with pitch, to board animals, family, friends, and artisans to survive. Does it sound familiar? Here is the crux of the matter. Utnapishtim's ark was not a boat. It was a cube. Its sides were equal in length. A perfect geometric vessel, not built to navigate, but to resist, float through chaos, defying destruction. And when the flood came, it did not drip. It roared. The skies unleashed torrents. The earth vomited water from its entrails. The wind screamed. The mountains were submerged. For 7 days and 7 nights, the world drowned and then fell silent. When the waters receded, Utnapishtim released the birds. First a dove, then a swallow, then a raven that did not return. The parallels to Noah's story are undeniable. But Gilgamesh predates the Hebrew Bible by at least a millennium. What does this mean? Does this mean the Bible borrowed from Babylon, or both echo something older? Because this is where it gets really strange. The Sumerian discs with the first known writings speak of a long line of kings ruling before the flood. The list of Sumerian kings records reigns of 10,000 years or more. Then the flood comes. Next, the story restarts with much shorter reigns. This isn't mythology. It is chronology, and the flood marks the dividing line. The Epic of Gilgamesh is not just literature. It is an artifact of cultural trauma. It remembers something real, a global event that marked humanity's timeline. And it is not the only one. Other Mesopotamian texts, like the Epic of Atrahasis, tell nearly identical stories. Gods who regret creating man, a chosen survivor, a divine boat, a flood. In Atrahasis, the flood is not caused by sin or noise, but rather by overpopulation. The gods could not sleep. Humanity had become too numerous and noisy. Again, the flood is a restart, a population control measure. But a common truth lies behind these stories. The world ended once, and someone remembered it. Modern geology says the most recent period ended about 11,600 years ago. A sudden warming, a massive thaw, the sea level rose, coasts disappeared, and islands were completely swallowed. If there was a civilization before that, the advanced culture that embraced the coasts, as most civilizations do, would be erased but not forgotten because the survivors write stories, and the stories become myths, and the myths become scriptures. The Epic of Gilgamesh may be the last whisper of that lost world. It is not just a tale of kings and monsters, but a blueprint. Because Utnapishtim's ark was not just a boat. It was a preservation vessel, a data capsule. Imagine that you know that a flood is coming, not just rain, but the collapse of the planet. Would you build a boat to save your life? Or a container to save your knowledge? What if the ark's true treasure wasn't the animals, but the information? Blueprints, DNA, astronomy, technology. Because the cubic structure that Utnapishtim builds is so exact and mathematical that it raises the question, was it a mythological metaphor or a memory of pre-flood engineering? And there's something else. The gods who send the flood aren't moral models. They are petty, divided, and chaotic. They reflect the Greek pantheon, the Nordic Aesir, the Anunnaki. Which raises the question, were these gods real beings, advanced entities? If so, the flood wasn't a divine punishment. It was a containment, a cleaning operation, a reset button. And those who survived weren't just lucky. They were chosen not only for piety, but for knowledge. Utnapishtim becomes immortal not because he's righteous, but because he obeyed, because he preserved something, because he knew. Gilgamesh, after hearing this, tries to gain immortality. He fails. He is told that death is his destiny, but knowledge is his gift. That is the message. We cannot live forever, but memories can. The Flood Tablet is not just a story of destruction. It is a code. It tells us that there was a world before this one, that something destroyed it, and the survivors tried to warn us in myths, clay, and metaphors. Because the flood was not just punishment. It was an eraser, a firewall. And the next mystery continues where Gilgamesh leaves off. Because while Mesopotamia was drowning, stories emerged all over the world. Tales of water, anger, and rebirth, coming from America, Asia, and Oceania. Almost all cultures on Earth remember the flood, and they all say same thing. It was not just a story. It was survival. Myths of a universal flood in all cultures. Take a map of world. Choose a continent. Then ask yourself, did the people here have a flood myth? The answer is almost always yes. From the frozen tundras of Siberia to the tropical jungles of Amazon, from the coral-ringed islands of Polynesia to the steppes of Central Asia, there are stories of a flood that ended world. Not one, not a few, but hundreds, possibly thousands. And the strange thing is that they not only resemble each other, but echo one another. Let's start where most would expect, the Near East. Mesopotamia, cradle of civilization, offers us Utnapishtim and the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Hebrew Bible offers us Noah. Both are chosen survivors. Both build an ark. Both save lives and witness a divine erasure of humanity's sensory noise. But this is just beginning. Scroll east to India. In the ancient Hindu texts, there is Manu, the first progenitor, warning by the god Vishnu, disguised as a fish that a great flood is coming. Manu builds a boat. He ties it to the fish that guides him through flood. When the waters recede, he repopulates the earth. Now let's go south to Africa. The Yoruba of Nigeria tell of a time when land was covered by water. The god Olin, lord of sea, became angry. The wickedness of humanity had unbalanced balance. The result? A flood. But a chosen few survived on high ground, saved by the wisdom of Erishas. The Dune people of Mali speak of a great serpent and a flood that restarted world. Their oral traditions preserve knowledge about stars and mythical chronologies that go back to before agriculture. Cross the Atlantic. In North America, Native American tribes preserve flood stories with an unsettling familiarity. The basket of 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐷𝐭, a trickster who angered Creator. The result was a flood that covered the earth. 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐷𝐭 survived in a canoe along with pairs of animals. Does that sound familiar to you? The Hopi, do you remember the Third World? Destroyed by a flood because humanity had deviated from the path of the Creator. The righteous were warned in time and hid inside floating reeds to reach safety, finally emerging to build the Fourth World. Further south, Mayan and Aztec mythologies speak of multiple worlds destroyed in different cataclysms. The Third World ended in a great flood. The current Fourth Era was born from these ruins. 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐿, the feathered serpent, warned humanity. A few survivors floated to safety in trees. The details change, but the structure remains. In Inca legend, there was a 𝐻𝐻𝐾, a world that turned upside down. The sun god, 𝐴𝐼𝐼, became angry with humanity and sent a flood. Two brothers chosen and guided by divine flame spirits survived in a cave high in the Andes. Now let's move on to Oceania. Australian Aborigines speak of a mythical, dreamlike era when the earth was formed and then reshaped by floods, fire, and wind. In some accounts, the rainbow serpent floods the earth to cleanse and remake it. In Polynesia, Samoan gods punish humanity for breaking the sacred laws of nature. A flood occurred. Only the tops of the highest mountains remained. In Hawaii, the goddess 𝐦𝐨𝐵𝐵 warns her children of an impending flood. Only a canoe saves them. Even in East Asia, the pattern is repeated. The classic Chinese book Xu Jing tells of a great flood controlled by the hero Yu the Great. The waters cover the mountains. The earth was chaos, but thanks to divine instructions and a monumental effort, he channeled the waters and restored balance. In Japan, the ancient Kojiki texts refer to a primeval flood that reshaped the islands, marking the beginning of human history. And in Europe, the Greeks told of Deucalion and Pyrrha, the virtuous couple who were saved from the wrath of Zeus. When humanity became too evil, Zeus unleashed a flood. Deucalion and Pyrrha, guided by Prometheus, built a chest or ark, survived the flood, and landed on Mount Parnassus. They repopulated the earth by throwing stones over their shoulders, stones that turned into people. The Celts told of a flood that preceded the arrival of the first tribes in Ireland. The first settlers were annihilated and replaced by new waves of settlers sent by gods. In Norse mythology, there is the story of Ymir, a primordial giant whose death releases rivers of blood that drown almost all beings, except for the divine survivors who reshape the cosmos. So what does all this mean? Why do all corners of the earth remember the same cataclysm? Historians often attribute it to coincidence, to the human tendency to fear water, and to mythologize natural disasters. It is true that floods occur everywhere. The rivers overflow. It rains cats and dogs. But is that all? Are we really expected to believe that more than 200 cultures independently invented the same myth? The survivors were warned in advance: boats or high ground, preserve animals, restart a world. It is too specific, too repeated, too global. There's a deeper truth here, because although the details change, the archetype stays the same. It is always a purification, a restart, a judgment, and a survival, and then the gift of knowledge. In almost all myths about floods, the survivors not only live but rebuild. They recover agriculture, language, fire, astronomy, as if they were remembering something, as if the survivors were more than just people. They were carriers, arcs of knowledge, biological hard drives. And the flood was not just punishment. It was a contention, a firewall between worlds, between the past and the subsequent time. This is what science tells to us. At the end of the last glaciation, about 11,600 years ago, the world violently changed. The glacial thaw caused a sea level rise of more than 120 meters. The continents were remodeled. The island chains disappeared. Entire ecosystems vanished. If advanced coastal civilizations existed, they would be annihilated. The survivors, if any, would flee inland to the hills and underground. Their stories would become myths, their tools would be lost, and their knowledge would be buried. But some would remember and speak in caves lit by bonfires, in songs, in engravings, and finally in books. And that is what these myths of the universal flood are about. They are not fairy tales or metaphors, but memories, cultural DNA, a last warning from the ancient world, a promise that the gods saw something like them intervene when we forget balance. So the question is not whether there was a flood. The question is how many times and how much is left for the next one. Because the flood is never just water. It is a convulsion, and those who survive leave their messages. Some painted, others carved, others encrypted, and others written on tablets that speak of something more than just floods. They speak of beings who came before, who altered us, who changed our code. And in the next mystery, that code is key. Theories about DNA manipulation before the flood. There's a question buried under each mythology, encoded in each story of floods, in each account of gods who walk among men. Why us? Why humans? Why do so many ancient traditions insist that humanity was not only created, but altered, molded, designed, elevated, always before a catastrophic flood? Welcome to the darkest hole in the antediluvian world. It is not about ancient cities, sunken temples, megaliths, or pyramids, but about DNA manipulated, modified, and possibly improved by beings who not only descended from the sky, but rewrote the genetic code of an entire species and may have paid a price. Let's start where myth meets molecular biology. In Genesis 6, verse 14, the text says, "The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and took them as wives." The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God united with the daughters of men and had children. They were the heroes of antiquity, men of renown. Now pause. This is not a metaphor. It is hybridization, celestial beings crossing with Homo sapiens. The result, the Nephilim, giants, yes, but more than that, something new, something unnatural. And the story is not exclusive to Bible. It is repeated in all cultures. In Sumeria, the Anunnaki descend from the heavens and teach humanity civilization. In the book of Enoch, the watchmen take human wives and teach forbidden sciences. In the Hindu texts, the gods mate with mortals, giving rise to demigods, some benevolent, others monstrous. But why would these beings come here? And why would they alter us? Modern thinkers like 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐬 argued that the Anunnaki came to Earth to extract gold. They created humans as genetically modified labor from hominids, using their own DNA as base. Whether you believe that literal story or not, the symbolic truth is powerful. Humanity was interfered with. We just didn't evolve. We were edited. And here's the question. Real science is catching up to myth. Let's talk about the Human Genome Project. Completed in 2003, it mapped all human DNA genes. What the scientists found was not just complexity, it was an anomaly. More than 97% of our DNA was classified as junk DNA. These are sequences that do not encode proteins. That does not mean they're useless, just that we still do not understand them. But imagine for a moment that these non-coding regions are more than remains. Imagine that they are comments in the code, embedded notes, backdoors, a kind of divine programming language. Even more curious is that the human genome shows signs of sudden leaps. Not gradual evolution, but bursts of complexity. Something or someone stepped on the accelerator. And one of those jumps occurs right around the appearance of Homo sapiens. 200,000 years ago, Homo erectus gives way to us, not only with larger brains, but with symbolic thought, language, art, religion. It is not only biology, it is consciousness, as if a switch was flipped. What if that switch were genetic? Now let's look at the mythologies again. The gods come down to earth. They teach humans agriculture, mathematics, writing, but they also give them something more. Self-awareness, the ability to question existence. That is not just evolution, it is programming. And sometimes the program fails. In almost all myths about the flood, the destruction is caused by a hybrid race. Half divine, half human, but totally chaotic. The Nephilim, the Titans, the Asaurus, the giants of the Book of Giants. They are not only bigger, but they are unstable. They consume, destroy, rebel. They are system errors, biological consequences of playing God. And the flood is not just a punishment. It is a system restoration, a massive deletion of corrupt files. The survivors, Noah, Utnapishtim, and Monastir, are clean copies, stable versions, backups. But that does not mean that the experiment is over because some of those corrupt genes may still exist. Let's take H-negative blood as an example. Most human beings have Rh-positive blood, but a small percentage, especially in Europe, lacks a specific protein found in the genetic line of the rhesus monkey. This anomaly causes complications in childbirth. H-negative mothers who give birth to H-positive babies may experience immune responses as if the fetus were an invader. Now ask yourself, why would nature do that? Why would evolution create a bloodline that treats its own offspring as if they were aliens? Unless the bloodline itself is alien. It is pure speculation, yes, but the H-negative theory remains one of the great biomedical anomalies. It defies any simple evolutionary explanation. And it gets even stranger. Throughout history, those with rare blood types or unusual genetics have been considered special, real, divine pharaohs, kings, prophets, all with lineage that goes back to the gods. Was it just a metaphor? Or did they say it literally? And if the DNA was altered before the flood, what happens now? Modern geneticists are now performing more precise genetic edits, cutting and replacing DNA as if it were software code. We are about to design our own children. Again, we are becoming observers, manipulators. And history warns us what will happen next. Because DNA is not only a molecule. It is a message, a record, a hard drive of ancient times. And if someone manipulated it once, they may have left signatures, watermarks, even security measures integrated into our own double helix, waiting to be activated. And perhaps, just perhaps, some of that knowledge prior to the flood did not disappear completely. Perhaps it was stored, not in stone or books, but in us. Because the next mystery is not about what remained among the ruins. It is about what may have been hidden in a sealed chamber, encoded in myths and written on tablets whispering about the stars. The Emerald Tablets of Thoth. There is a legend that has obsessed alchemists, mystics, and occultists for centuries. The story of a book that is not made of paper, but of a green crystalline stone, indestructible and indecipherable to the uninitiated. Known simply as the Emerald Tablets, attributed to Thoth, the ancient Egyptian god of wisdom, writing, and magic. It is said that the Emerald Tablets contain the secrets of the universe, the structure of reality, the mechanics of time, the path to immortality, and a knowledge of civilizations that rose and fell long before ours. Let's begin with Thoth. In Egyptian mythology, he was not just a scribe. He was the divine guardian of records, the mediator of cosmic balance, the inventor of language and mathematics, the one who measured the heavens and the underworld. Thoth is represented with the head of an ibis, carrying a stylus. But this is only his Egyptian form. In other cultures, he is known by different names. For the Greeks, he was Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes thrice great. A fusion of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth, this composite figure became the patron of alchemy, astrology, and arcane science. For the Rosicrucians and Hermeticists of the Renaissance, he was the source of all true wisdom. And for the most esoteric traditions, he was not human, but something more, something from before the flood. The myth of the Emerald Tablets says that before the cataclysm, before Atlantis fell, before Egypt arose, even before Sumer dreamed of gods, Thoth not only lived among men, but ruled as priest-king of a highly advanced civilization. When the flood came, he did not perish. He descended into underground chambers to protect the most important thing, knowledge. He inscribed it on tablets that were not of gold or parchment, but of a translucent green material that could not be damaged, scratched, or altered. Emerald, or perhaps a material beyond our understanding. They were not tablets in a biblical sense. They were technological artifacts, coded, resonant, and alive. According to the myth, Thoth hid these tablets in a chamber under the Great Pyramid, under the Sphinx, or even under the sands of the Amazon, depending on the version followed. The knowledge was too dangerous to destroy, but too powerful to leave unattended. So he built traps, seals, and codes that only the worthy could decipher. Now the story gets strange. In the 12th century, a text appeared in the Islamic world, the Tabula Smaragdina, or the Emerald Tablet. It was brief, only a dozen lines, but it became the basis for all Western alchemy. What is below is like what is above, and what is above is like what's below. This single phrase started centuries of magical science. Newton translated it. Isaac Newton, father of modern physics, kept a copy inside his notebook. It describes the unity of all things, the fractal nature of reality, the idea that the macrocosm and the microcosm reflect each other, that consciousness shapes matter, that by knowing the structure of self, one can know the structure of the cosmos. It was not just mystical poetry. It was an instruction manual, but a fragment, a preview of something much older. Because the Emerald Table, which most people know in its abbreviated alchemical version, is probably a surviving fragment, a whisper of a larger corpus of knowledge that has been lost. And that is where the deeper tradition of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth comes to play. In the 20th century, a man named Maurice Dorel, mystic, cultist, and founder of the Brotherhood of the White Temple, claimed to have translated a complete set of these tablets. He published them as the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. According to Dorel, the tablets were given to him by secret masters. He described them as made of a mysterious green material. He affirmed that they vibrated with their own internal frequency. He said that they had to be read telepathically, not visually. Incredible. Yes. But what do the texts say? They speak of Atlantis, a golden civilization governed by philosopher kings, fed by the energy of the universe itself. Thoth was one of them, a scientist priest, a technologist with a tunic. According to what they tell us, Atlantis did not fall due to its arrogance, but to the misuse of energy, a great explosion, a dimensional rupture, the type of cosmic accident that occurs when reality itself is altered. Thoth and a few others escaped before the collapse, taking with them the fundamental secrets of their science. They fled to 𝐦𝐤𝐬, which would later become Egypt. There they built pyramids, underground rooms, and codified their science in symbols, structures, and sounds. The tablets describe anti-gravity, interdimensional travel, the manipulation of light and vibration, and the process of becoming light, transcending mortality by aligning one's frequency with the divine source. Whether you believe that Dorel's translation is authentic, channeled, or invented, the ideas it contains are consistent with the ancient schools of mysteries, quantum theory, and non-local consciousness. Which raises a disturbing question. What if this knowledge was real? What if it were part of a science prior to the flood? Not only metaphysical, but technological. A language of energy encoded in symbols. A physics of spirituality. What if the tablets are still out there? Physical, real, hidden under the sand or the sea, or in chambers beneath the oldest temples on Earth. Think about it. Ancient cultures obsessed with green stones, emeralds, jade, mulivite. Stones that, it is said, connect Earth with the divine. Why? Perhaps because they remembered it. They remembered Thoth, Hermes, the builder of pyramids, the scribe of the gods. And they remembered the tablets. And they built their civilizations as echoes of theirs, temples as energy machines, writings as codes, rituals as resonances. And somewhere beneath our feet, those original tablets may still exist, waiting, sealed not only by stone doors, but by frequency locks. Protected not only by riddles, but by our own ignorance, because the knowledge they contain is not only dangerous. It is transformative. It reveals not only where we come from, but who we are. Not only biology, but the blueprint. Not only a record of the past, but a map of the soul. And perhaps that is why the tablets were buried. Not so that they would be lost, but so that we would find them when we were ready. When the flood of ignorance has receded, when the resonance of humanity is high enough to unlock them, and perhaps, just perhaps, we are about to arrive. Because the next mystery does not float in legend. It lies under a lake considered sacred for millennia, where the water hides ruins. And the ruins whisper of a civilization too old to date and too vast to forget. The underwater ruins of Lake Titicaca. High in the Andes, perched on the border between Peru and Bolivia, there is a mass of water so vast and deep that it seems more like a fragment of ocean exiled to the mountains than a lake. Lake Titicaca, the highest navigable lake in the world, more than 3,800 meters above sea level, has been venerated for thousands of years. The Incas believed it was the place where the sun was born. The Tiwanaku considered it sacred, and the peoples who preceded them, who left no name or books, only stones, perhaps left something more. Ruins that are not found on the shore, but under the water, submerged cities, drowned temples, roads that fade into the depths. And in the center of it all, a mystery that precedes history itself. Let's go back to 2000. A team of international archaeologists, led by the 𝐦𝐨𝐬 Exploration Geographic Society, announced a shocking discovery just below Lake Titicaca's surface. They found what appeared to be an immense ancient structure, a temple possibly between 1,500 and 2,000 years old, built with huge, aligned, and carved stone blocks for a definite purpose. And that was just the beginning. The divers also reported roads, walls, terraces, an entire underwater complex stretching for over half a kilometer. The scale was immense, the construction advanced, and the implications were devastating. Because if a temple of that size lies under the lake, then it has not always been there. And if the lake appeared later, what put it there? Was it a slow geological change, or was it sudden? Was it a flood? Because here is the problem of Titicaca Lake. It makes no sense. Geologically, hydrologically, archaeologically, it breaks all the rules. First, its altitude. Most freshwater lakes at this altitude are small, glacial remnants. Titicaca is an inland sea of more than 8,300 square kilometers, with a depth of over 270 meters in places. It is fed by rain and melting snow, but has no visible outlet. Where does all the water go? Part is diverted to the 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐬 River, but not enough to explain the flow it receives. It is as if the lake were too large for its drainage system, too permanent for its age, too full for its source. Then there is the salinity. The lake is fresh water, but contains marine fossils, crustaceans, and algae, species that should not be there. It is as if the lake had been connected to the ocean, or had been the ocean, or had contained the ocean, and some ancient catastrophe locked in the mountains. But how? Let's move away a bit. The Altinethys Plateau, where Lake Titicaca is a geological anomaly. It may have been part of a plane at sea level that was violently uplifted by tectonic forces. Or maybe something else pushed it up. Something sudden, something biblical. Because when submerged ruins are found at this altitude, the timeline is broken. The current level of Lake Titicaca would only have covered those structures after a dramatic change. And the last time such a change occurred was at the end of the last ice age, approximately 11,600 years ago. The same moment that Plato said Atlantis sank. The same moment that 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐤 was buried. The same moment that the dust impact hypothesis suggests a comet shattered the northern ice sheet, sending meltwater that flooded the entire planet. Could that same event have shaken the Andes, created the lake, and drowned a city? Because the ruins under Titicaca are not alone. On the nearby coast is the archaeological site of 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐞, which defies all logic. Once considered a ceremonial center, it now looks more like the broken bones of some forgotten civilization. Blocks of stone weighing 100 tons or more, scattered like toys, carved with precision, fitted with joints. But 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐞 is 12 miles from the lake. So why does it have a port, a dock? Huge stone structures designed for loading and unloading. But now there is no water there. Not enough. Which means the coastline has shifted dramatically. That only happens with floods or drains, or both. And then there is Pumapunku, even more mysterious. Huge H-shaped blocks made of andesite stone, harder than steel, cut with angles so precise that they match the tolerances of modern machines. And yet, they are destroyed. Not demolished, but exploded as if hit by a force beyond human capacity. Some believe that it was an earthquake. Others suspect something more violent. An impact, a wave, or a weapon. Whatever it was, it didn't just destroy the buildings. It erased their context. Because we don't know who built these sites. The Incas have no records. They said 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐞 was already old when their empire arose. Perhaps the 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐞 people, but their work in stone is primitive compared to the megaliths that surround them. It is as if someone else built the core and later people tried to rebuild the outer structure. We see this pattern again and again in Egypt, Peru, Mexico, Turkey. Overlapping civilizations, stone upon stone, advanced under primitive, as if the true architects had been erased and only ruins remained. Now, let's return to the water. Local legend says that the founders of the Incas, 𝐾𝐴C and Mama Aquaros, sent by the sun god 𝐼𝐚𝐽, emerged from Lake Titicaca. But what if this isn't just a myth? What if it's a memory? A cultural echo from the survivors? A sacred lake, not because it gave birth to gods, but because it swallowed them whole. Because it hides the last city of a lost era. What if those underwater ruins are not just temples? What if they were vaults? Storage chambers of knowledge prior to the flood, preserved under the cold and dark water, intact, forgotten, awaiting. Because the ancient builders did not place things by chance. They understood energy, resonance, and water as a conductor, preserver, sealer. What better way to protect something from the chaos of the surface than to sink it? And if they knew the flood was coming, perhaps they built a vault on purpose. Not to survive, but rather to remember. Because memory is more than writing. It is its architecture, its alignment, its vibration. And maybe, just maybe, the lake itself is part of the design. A living monument, a veil. And what lies under that veil? We don't know because we have barely begun exploring it. The expedition of 2000 was only a surface look. There are rumors of new dives, new anomalies, artifacts taken from the silt and disappeared into silence. Because here lies the real mystery. Why is more not known about this? Why are there no constant expeditions, documentaries, or dives? Why does this story always remain buried? Perhaps for the same reason as all the mysteries before the flood. Because they not only challenge history, but fracture it. They suggest that we're not the first. That there was another world, another era, and it drowned. But not before leaving messages underwater, in stone, in code. And the next mystery isn't in the Andes. It is under all of the oceans. It is the greatest secret of all. The rising tide that swallowed everything and the cities that may still lie beneath. The Ice Age, sea levels, and the lost cities. Imagine the world 20,000 years ago, not the world of agriculture, writing, pharaohs, or even mammoths. Go back further to an era when ice dominated everything. Enormous glaciers covered almost a third of the Earth's surface. In North America, they extended past present-day Chicago. In Europe, they covered Scandinavia, the British Isles, and vast expanses of Russia. The sea was locked in icy vaults, and as a result, the global sea level was up to 120 meters lower than today. 120 meters. That is the height of a 40-story skyscraper. 40-story skyscraper. Now imagine what was on those ancient coasts before the thaw, before the flood, before history began again. Because here is an uncomfortable truth. Most human settlements, since the early days of our species, were built near water. Rivers, lakes, and especially coasts. Why? Because coasts offer everything an early civilization needs. Food, trade, climate stability, and transportation. And if the sea was hundreds of meters lower than now, today's oceans are drowning yesterday's cities. Let's do the math. The UN estimates that over 40% of the world's population lives less than 100 kilometers from a coast. That is today. Now, let's go back 10,000 or 20,000 years. Let's imagine the coasts as they were during the Ice Age. They extended for kilometers. What is now the seabed was then a fertile plain, and what is now an uninterrupted ocean may once have been civilization's cradle. But when the ice melted suddenly, violently, and catastrophically, the oceans rose and the world we know disappeared. This is not speculation. It is geology. The transition from the last glacial maximum to the Holocene period in which we still live was marked by rapid, massive changes. Sea level not only rose steadily, but skyrocketed. One of these peaks, Meltwater Pulse 1, occurred approximately 14,600 years ago. Sea level rose more than 15 meters in under 500 years. Imagine entire cities swallowed in the space of a few generations. Flooded ports, submerged temples, mountains turned to islands. But if the cities were submerged, where are they? We enter the submerged cities. Let's start with 𝐦𝐤𝐬, off the coast of India. In 2001, marine archaeologists discovered submerged ruins in the Gulf of Cambodge. Stone walls, grids, and structures that extend over 5 square miles under 120 feet of water. Carbon dating of recovered artifacts suggests the site could be over 9,000 years old. If confirmed, that would rewrite history. Conventional history places the beginning of Indian civilization around 2500 BC. With the rise of the Indus Valley, but 𝐦𝐤𝐬 would be earlier by millennia. Then there is 𝐦𝐨𝐤𝐤, off the coast of the Ryukyu Islands in Japan. Under the waves lie megalithic formations that some claim to be artificial. Enormous terraces, straight edges, and staircase-shaped structures carved into sandstone. The critics say that it is a natural formation, but even skeptics admit that the symmetry is disturbing, and some divers have reported that they have seen tool marks. If 𝐦𝐨𝐤𝐤 is artificial, it dates back at least 10,000 years, when that part of the Pacific was dry land. Let's move now to the Mediterranean Sea. In the Bay of Naples, the ancient Roman city of Baia lies submerged due to volcanic activity and rising sea levels. Streets, villas, mosaics, all preserved underwater. But that is just a modern example. Further east, near the island of Delos, are underwater ruins from the pre-classical era of Greece. In Egypt, the city of Heraclea was found under the Nile Delta, a metropolis that once rivaled Alexandria. Temples, statues, coins buried by water and silt. But Heraclea only sank 1,200 years ago. What about the cities that sank 12,000 years ago? We are barely beginning to investigate because underwater archaeology is expensive, dangerous, and politically inconvenient. It questions everything. The chronology, the narrative, the idea that history is a slow ascent from caveman to cosmopolitan. If cities were already thriving before the flood, then we are the reboot, not the origin. The flooded platform of Sunda in Southeast Asia could have been the true cradle of humanity. During the Ice Age, it formed a huge continent connecting what is now Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. It had rivers, mountains, and an extensive coastline. Then, the sea rose and it disappeared. The same thing happened with Doggerland. It is now a submerged plain under the North Sea. Doggerland connected Great Britain to continental Europe. It was the home of hunter-gatherers. We have unearthed bones, tools, and even remains of human DNA. Doggerland was not a lost city, but a lost land. And that land could have housed much more than we think. This is the conclusion. We have explored less than 5% of the ocean floor. Most underwater discoveries have been accidental. A diver hooks a statue. A submariner notices a wall. A satellite detects an anomaly. That means that most of the ancient history of our planet could still be underwater, not lost, but asleep. And the implications are profound. Because if there were cities before the flood, there were governments, languages, technologies, religions, and if they knew the flood was coming, some may have tried to save what was important. Not their lives, but their knowledge. And they would have sealed it in the depths of temples, in vaults, in stone, waiting for the waters to recede. And maybe, just maybe, that's what we're starting to find. Not just ruins, but warnings, instructions, clues. And if we follow them, they can lead us to the greatest mystery of all. The machines, not the myths, not the temples, but the tools. Built before the flood, buried by the sea, and waiting to be turned on again. Megaliths under Lake Michigan. It sounds like the plot of a science fiction movie set in the Midwest. Under the cold and murky waters of Lake Michigan lies a structure that should not exist. Not according to the textbooks. Not according to the standard chronology of North American history. But it is there, or at least that is what the divers and sonar teams who found it claim. Megaliths arranged in a circle, with one of the stones bearing what appears to be a petroglyph of a mastodon. That's right, an engraving of an animal believed to have been extinct for over 10,000 years. Let's picture the scene. In 2007, a team of researchers led by Dr. Mark Hawley, professor of underwater archaeology at Northwestern Michigan College, scanned the bottom of the Grand Traverse Bay with sonar. They were conducting a routine study to map any shipwrecks. Instead, they found a mystery. At 12 meters deep, a series of large stones appeared deliberately arranged. Some standing, others fallen. Some showed signs of alignment and spacing that echoed other megalithic structures found throughout the world, like Stonehenge, the Karnak megaliths, or the ancient circles that defy explanation. And then came the most surprising thing. One of the stones had a faint engraving, unmistakable to some, of a mastodon. An animal that once roamed North America in the last ice age, disappearing sometime around 10,000 AC. If it is authentic, this petroglyph could place the creation of the site in the prehistoric epoch, thousands of years before the emergence of the Egyptian pyramids, before Göbekli, before history as we know it. Let's reflect on this, because Lake Michigan as we know it today has not always existed. At the end of the last glaciation, as the glaciers retreated, the Great Lakes began to form, but they were not always full. Many of the basins were dry or swampy valleys that early human populations could cross. It is even possible that Paleo-Indians walked through these basins, hunted mastodons on those plains, and built stone arrangements that reflected the stars, the seasons, or the hunt. And then the waters rose, the lake filled, and everything they built was submerged. It is not an exaggeration. It is supported by dozens of discoveries in the Great Lakes region. Stone tools, bonfires, camps found on now-submerged coasts, all dated to the Ice Age. But the megaliths of Lake Michigan go further because a circular arrangement of standing stones is not just a bonfire. It is a statement, a symbol, a code. In almost all ancient cultures, a circle of stones represents something sacred, a calendar, a cosmology, a temple without walls. The mere existence of such a structure in prehistoric America challenges the narrative that the first peoples of this region were nomadic hunter-gatherers, lacking architectural ambition or symbolic culture. But this is the pattern we see again. Underwater structures that do not fit. Megaliths without cultural explanation. Knowledge that seems too early, too advanced, out of place. It is called the unpart phenomenon, artifacts out of place, and the stones of Lake Michigan could be the most mysterious unpart in the entire Midwest. What happened after the discovery? Not much. The story briefly attracted media attention, sparked some local interest, then faded. Why? Because confirming the authenticity of the mastodon carving would require expensive underwater excavations, cleaning, dating, and analysis, something few institutions will fund. And because the implications are transcendental, if real, since they suggest North America had a megalithic culture during or just after the Ice Age. Not a primitive and scattered collection of tribes, but a culture capable of aligning stones, inscribing messages, and possibly even mapping stars. And if that culture existed here, where else did it exist? We have been taught to see the ancient world, Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, as the origin of all advanced civilization. But what if knowledge was not transmitted in a single line? What if it radiated outward from a central cataclysm? The flood, the thaw, the moment when ice became ocean and the world was baptized anew. Perhaps the survivors scattered. Perhaps they took with them fragments of what had been before. And perhaps they did not rebuild in one place, but in many. From the Andes to the Altiplano, from the Fertile Crescent to the Mississippi Valley, from Yonaguni to the Bimini Road, and yes, from Stonehenge to the depths of Lake Michigan. Each culture with a fragment of the mirror, a piece of the code, a node in the memory of an antediluvian world. And the stones are the backup files. Immovable, undeniable, inconvenient, because you can erase a book, burn a library, reinterpret myths. But a 10-ton granite block arranged in a perfect circle under a lake that does not disappear and cannot lie. So maybe we should stop asking ourselves, did this civilization exist? And ask, what did it know? What did the builders of these circles know about the earth, the sky, energy, vibration, and sound? Because wherever megaliths are found, we find strange acoustics, standing waves, resonance chambers, and magnetic anomalies. It's as if the stones were not just markers. They were machines. And maybe the ones under Lake Michigan once hummed with a frequency. Maybe they were used to amplify rituals, encode memory, or communicate through time. Or maybe, like the emerald tablets, they were never meant for us to find. Not yet. Perhaps they were a part of a network. A planetary network of stone consciousness that went out during the flood, awaiting a restart, waiting for us to remember. Because the history of prehistory is not a history of progress. It is a history of cycles, a spiral. And we've been here before, rising, forgetting, drowning. And the stones are breadcrumbs that lead us back to the beginning. And if you follow them long enough, they will lead you to war, to weapons buried in ancient texts, to lost books and the next mystery, where the sky collapsed, the giants fought, and the flood was not just the end. It was the sequel, the Book of 𝐥𝐤𝐬, and the Antediluvian War. Before the Bible existed as we know it, other texts existed. Roar, Wilder, texts that hovered on the edge of the canon, then were ignored, forbidden, or simply forgotten. One of those texts is the Book of 𝐥𝐤𝐬, mentioned twice in the Bible, once in Joshua 10 verse 13 and again in 2 Samuel 1 verse 18. It is cited as a legitimate historical source, a record of righteous men, kings, and warriors. But the version we have today, often called pseudo-𝐥𝐤𝐬, is a translation of a Hebrew manuscript published in the 17th century. And it contains a vision of Earth before the flood that shoots down all the sweetened stories of Sunday school. Because in the Book of 𝐥𝐤𝐬, the time before the flood was not only sinful, but apocalyptic. It was not a paradise slowly corrupted by temptation. It was a high-tech powder keg, rebellious genetics, and total war. Let's dive in. The Book of 𝐥𝐤𝐬 describes the world before the flood as one of vast empires, incredible lives, and human achievements bordering on divinity. But those achievements come at a cost. We are told that the earth was corrupted before God, not only immoral, but broken, twisted, violated at a structural level. In chapter 4, we learn that the sons of men in those days took from the cattle of the earth, from the beasts of the field, and from the birds of the sky, and taught to mix animals of one species with another. Wait, what? That's not just sin. That's genetic manipulation. This passage hints at genetic manipulation of species on an industrial scale. Chimeras, hybrids, designer beasts. It is the same theme repeated in the Book of Enoch, where the fallen watchers teach humanity forbidden knowledge, such as metallurgy, enchantments, and the resolution of enchantments, code for biochemical or spiritual dissection. So, according to 𝐥𝐢𝐬, we are facing a world in which humans lived for centuries, had access to advanced agricultural and construction techniques, and engage in interspecies engineering, literally. It was not a primitive era. It was the height of a lost technological age. And then the wars began. The Book of 𝐥𝐢𝐬 describes massive conflicts between tribes, kings, giants and humans, and even factions of giants. These were not small skirmishes over grazing lands. They were of global scale. Chapter 4 says, "And every man made himself a god, and they all stole and plundered from their neighbor. And their judges and rulers went to the daughters of men and forcibly took their wives from their husbands. Society had collapsed. The rule of law had disappeared. Each city watched over itself well. Imagine titanic battles fought with weapons we cannot name. Not spears or slings, but energy, frequencies, fire from the sky, shiny metal cities, walls that responded to sound, weapons carved with glyphs." The Book of 𝐥𝐢𝐬 does not describe the weapons directly, but describes consequences. The mountains split, the rivers turned red, the skies darkened, and, finally, the earth itself groaned under the weight of corruption. This is where the flood comes in, not as punishment for bad behavior, but as a necessary reset, a cosmic countermeasure, a planetary purge. But the war did not end only with the water, because the true war was the one that was fought under the surface for knowledge. In several places, 𝐥𝐢𝐬 implies the sons of men were wise and knew all works on earth. They had the knowledge of the watchers, of the sons of Elohim. And when they fought, they did so to control that knowledge. The flood swept away the cities, the giants, the machines. But it did not erase the memory, because memory is not only in books. It is in the blood, in the stone, in songs, and the survivors. In 𝐥𝐢𝐬 we are told that Noah was instructed in the ways of the Lord, but also he was perfect in his generation. That phrase, perfect in his generation, unleashed centuries of debate. Was it a moral or genetic affirmation? If the world was flooded with hybrids and mutants, then perhaps Noah represented the last uncorrupted lineage, the last blank canvas. But if Noah was chosen for his genetics, that suggests the world before the flood was not just a story with morals. It was a scientific experiment that went wrong, and the war was a violation of containment. So what about the ark? In 𝐥𝐢𝐬, the construction of the ark is not only an act of faith. It is a technological challenge. Noah is given the dimensions, the instructions, and specific materials. Basically, he is building a biosphere, a vault, a black box, not only for the animals but for humanity's last chance. The ark becomes the counterweight to the tower because, yes, 𝐥𝐢𝐬 also offers us an expanded version of the story of the Tower of Babel. After the flood, humanity tries to rebuild to return to the skies, but the languages are confused. The plan is disordered, and the ancient knowledge has been lost or scattered. Some believe that parts of that knowledge still exist in ancient texts, in sacred geometry, in songs passed down from generation to generation, in megaliths buried under the mountains. Others believe that it is in us, latent, encoded in our DNA, waiting to be activated. Because here is the crux of the matter. The Book of 𝐥𝐢𝐬 is not the only one that affirms this. Throughout the ancient world, there are rumors of a war before the flood. In the epic of the Mahabharata, battles were fought on a nuclear scale with celestial weapons. In Sumerian mythology, the earth is flooded to stop the Anunnaki human hybrids. In Norse legend, the gods and giants fight Ragnarok, which ends in fire and flood. Even in the traditions of Native Americans, the Brothers of the Stars, and the great wars that shattered the earth. Different languages, same pattern, same war, same flood. So, what were they really fighting for? Not for gold, nor for land. For knowledge, the power to create, to destroy, to ascend. and perhaps part of that knowledge survived in secret schools, in coded manuscripts, in temples built for vibration. Perhaps the Book of 𝐥𝐢𝐬 is not a fantasy. Perhaps it is a warning that when ancient knowledge is misused, when blood is mixed, when the machine is taken too far, the reset comes in the form of water, war, and silence. Because the next mystery is not written in a book. It is whispered in the darkness, in the ancient temples, in the sacred forests. And the final question of all is, why do so many cultures say that the gods came from the sky? Not figuratively, literally. The missing link between myth and history. There's a blurred, irregular line, intentionally erased between what we call myth and what we call history. Between Zeus and Caesar, between Gilgamesh and Hammurabi, between the gods who gave form to man and the men who built kingdoms. But the more you age, the more that line fades. Because the more you delve, the more you start to hear the same whisper repeated in each cradle of civilization, in each sacred text, in each carved stone. They taught us. We do not evolve. We did not discover it by chance. They taught it to us. Civilization did not crawl out of the silence in which it was. From the stars, from above, from the men of the sky. Let's start with the oldest mythologies on Earth. The Sumerians, the first known writers, called their gods the Anunnaki. They were not ethereal spirits, nor invisible creators, but physical, tangible beings that came from the skies. Those who came from the sky to the earth. Not only did they govern, but they also built. According to the Sumerian tablets, these gods of the sky created humanity by combining the DNA of the primitive creatures of the earth with their own essence. Why? To build, to work, to extract gold, to serve. In other words, they did not evolve us. They improved us. And they did not do it only once. In the book of Enoch, the Watchers, another group of celestial beings, descend to earth. They fall in love with human women. They create a hybrid race, the Nephilim, giants, aberrations, and the consequences are terrible. They're not bedtime stories. They're deeply uncomfortable accounts about genetic transgressions, celestial treason, and wars between species. But again and again, the pattern repeats. Celestial beings, genetic manipulation, cataclysmic consequences, and a flood to clean the board. Then, civilization starts again. And what do the survivors always say that the gods taught them? Writing, language, medicine, astronomy, architecture, everything that we associate with civilization. The ancient Egyptians spoke of the first time that the gods governed directly over men, the Zephytha. 𝐤 Ra. It was not about abstract deities. They were described as beings of flesh and bone that walked, taught, governed, and then disappeared. The Mayans said that their knowledge came from celestial serpents. The Dune people of Mali affirmed that their ancestors had received a visit from amphibian beings from Sirius B, who taught them an astronomy so precise that it included the invisible binary star Sirius B, discovered by Western science in the 20th century. In India, the Mahabharata describes the flying ships Vimanas used by the gods in aerial battles with weapons that resemble radiation bombs and laser rays. In China, it is said that the Yellow Emperor descended from a chariot of fire in the shape of a dragon. In Greece, Prometheus brought the knowledge of fire to humanity against the wishes of Zeus. In the Nordic pantheon, Odin descends from Asgard, carrying runes of power and wisdom stolen from the well located under the world tree. The same story, another continent, other names, but always someone from above gives humanity the tools of civilization and then disappears. So here's the question. Were they only metaphors? Stories told by pre-scientific minds to explain natural phenomena? Or were they memories? The descendants of a post-cataclysmic species that remember through the veil of myth their history of origin, because when poetry is removed, what remains is something disturbingly familiar. A species is genetically improved. It acquires awareness of itself. Its population shoots up. Its technology grows without control. It rebels against its creators. And then comes the judgment, the restart, the start again. That is not a fairy tale. It is a cycle. And it is the same cycle that all myths before the flood whisper of. The inhabitants of the sky are not always gods in a traditional sense. They often arrive with tools, machines, ships, and rules. They act more like cosmic scientists than spiritual entities. They establish conditions for civilization. Then they step back. Sometimes they will return. Sometimes they just observe. Sometimes they get involved again when things get out of hand. It is the same story told by indigenous peoples, occultists, even modern UFO researchers. And it raises the possibility that the gods of myth were never gods. They were advanced beings from Earth's past, coming from somewhere else. And their footprints are everywhere to see. In the genetic anomalies of human evolution, in the megaliths that baffle modern engineers, in the flood myths that speak of a failed experiment, and in the mysteries that we still cannot explain. Why are there no transitional fossils between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens? Why do so many ancient texts insist that the stars are accessible, not far away? Why are almost all ancient temples aligned with celestial events? Why did all the first civilizations emerge fully formed, with writing, mathematics, and laws, instead of slowly evolving? Because maybe we did not emerge from chaos. Maybe we have fallen from grace. Maybe we've all done this before, and the missing link isn't in our bones. It is in our stories and genes, in the temples submerged by the sea, in the texts locked in vaults, and in the myths that we tell ourselves to forget what we once knew. That we're not the first, that gods once walked among us, and that they left a map behind. Not on any paper, not in words, but in stone, in stars, and in mysteries so deep they defy explanation. So, if you want to find the truth, don't just look at what's up there, look down there. The flood did not erase absolutely everything. It left memories, crumbs, and the most dangerous secret of all, the gods were real. It's that they could.